Hey there, tonight we're diving into a day on the Silk Road Caravan, where the truth is that the real adventure lies not in the treasures traded, but in the unexpected encounters and stories shared over crackling campfires beneath endless desert stars. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. So here you are, standing in the middle of an ancient trade network that doesn't just connect two points, but weaves together entire worlds. Yep, you're on the Silk Road, or to be more accurate, the Silk Roads. Forget the image of a singular dusty trail. This was more like a sprawling spiderweb of routes stretching over 4,000 miles. We're talking about a trade network so vast it could make a modern metro system look like a toddler's playset. Now, let's get one thing straight. This wasn't a single road paved with silk, as the name might tempt you to believe. While Silk Road sounds like something out of a fairy tale book, the reality was a lot messier and infinitely more fascinating. This was a network of interconnected routes that spanned continents, crossing mountains, deserts, and even seas, all the way from the bustling marketplaces of the East to the sophisticated salons of the West. It was like the ancient world's version of the Internet, with goods, ideas, and sometimes diseases zipping across Eurasia. The Silk Road kicked off around the 2nd century BCE, thanks to the Han Dynasty over in China. They were looking to make some connections, boost their economy, and maybe show off their silk. Because who doesn't love a bit of showing off when you've got something as fancy as silk? And silk was the bee's knees back then. Romans were willing to drop some serious coin on it, despite the Senate occasionally throwing a hissy fit over how it might corrupt Roman morals. Spoiler alert, silk was just too fabulous to resist. But oh, the Silk Road was about so much more than just silk. Picture this, traders dealing in spices that could make or break a dish, precious stones that glittered like the night sky, and even paper, which would eventually revolutionize the way people communicated. We're talking saffron from Persia, jade from China, and pearls from the Gulf. If it was valuable and could be carried by a camel, it was probably making its way along these routes. And the economic impact, massive. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara in Central Asia became bustling hubs of commerce. They weren't just pit stops. They were destinations in their own right, where traders would gather, exchange goods, and haggle until the cows came home, or the camels in this case. These cities grew rich and powerful, influencing politics, culture, and even the fate of empires. They were the Wall Streets of their day, minus the stark tickers, and with a lot more sand. Let's bust another myth while we're at it. The Silk Road wasn't just about the exchange of goods. It was a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and religions. Buddhism, for instance, made its way from India to China along these routes, carried by monks who braved the harsh climates and bandit-infested trails. And it didn't stop there. Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and later Islam all found new followers as they spread across continents. The Silk Road was like a giant think tank that never slept. Now, don't go imagining this was a smooth operation. The journey was perilous, with traders facing threats from bandits, extreme weather, and the occasional territorial warlord who thought he'd try his hand at highway robbery. It was a high-risk, high-reward game, and not everyone made it to the finish line. But those who did could find themselves fabulously wealthy, assuming they didn't lose it all at the next trading post by betting on the wrong horse, or camel, as it were. So, as you stand in the middle of this bustling network, remember that you're part of something much bigger than a mere trade route. You're part of a living history that shaped the world in ways that still reverberate today. The Silk Road was the heartbeat of ancient commerce, pumping life and wealth across continents, and you're right in the thick of it. Take a deep breath of that dust-laden air and feel the pulse of history around you. This is the Silk Road, and it's not just a path, it's an adventure. So, you've got your sandals firmly planted on the dusty trails of the Silk Road. What's it really like to spend a day as a Silk Road trader, you ask? Well, pull up a metaphorical camel saddle, because we're diving into the nitty-gritty of caravan life around the 8th century. Spoiler alert, it's less about glamorous trade and more about the gritty reality of logistics. with a side order of unpredictability that would make even the most seasoned traveler think twice. First things first, let's talk about the caravan. Forget the modern image of a sleek, air-conditioned convoy. Picture a ragtag assembly of camels, mules, and maybe a few hardy donkeys for good measure. These caravans were the lifeblood of the Silk Road, each one a miniature economy on the move. But here's the kicker. Running one of these bad boys was about as cheap as a yacht party in Monaco. We're talking serious coin. Maintaining a caravan required a hefty investment, not just in the animals but in supplies, food, and of course, bribes, tolls to ensure safe passage through the various territories. Now about those camels. Yes, they're the ships of the desert, capable of carrying 400 pounds of goods on their humps like it's nothing. But these ships have minds of their own. Ever tried convincing a camel that it's time to move when it's decided it's break time? Spoiler, it's not happening. You might as well ask the desert to grow grass. And when a camel sits, it sits. And you, dear trader, are going nowhere until it decides otherwise. It's the camel's world, you're just living in it. But let's say your caravan's all packed up, and the camels are in a cooperative mood. You're ready to hit the road, averaging a whopping 20 miles a day. That's right, 20 miles. At that pace, you're not exactly going to break any land speed records, but hey, who needs speed when you're carrying a fortune in silk and spices? And speaking of spices, let's not forget the economic punch these little flavor bombs packed. A pinch of saffron was worth its weight in gold, quite literally. One misstep, and you could be spilling a small fortune onto the sands. The daily grind isn't all about trudging through sand, though. You've got to deal with the logistics of feeding and watering your caravan. Imagine planning meals for a small army every day, where each mouthful counts and one miscalculation could leave you rationing dried dates like they're bars of gold. Water, it's your most precious cargo. Lose it, and you might as well start counting tumbleweeds. And then there are the bandits. Oh, the bandits. These weren't your swashbuckling rogues with a heart of gold. Think more along the lines of merciless opportunists with a nose for treasure. Every trader worth their salt had to be ready to negotiate, bribe, or, if all else failed, make a run for it. The threat was real, and so were the losses. One ill-fated encounter could turn a profitable venture into a financial disaster faster than you could say, trade embargo. Of course, the terrain itself was no walk in the park, either. Mountains, deserts, and rivers all posed their own unique challenges. Crossing the Pamir Mountains, known as the roof of the world, was akin to trying to navigate an obstacle course blindfolded. And the Taklamakan Desert, let's just say its name roughly translates to go in and you won't come out. Charming. But despite all these hurdles, there was something undeniably alluring about the Silk Road. Maybe it was the promise of wealth beyond imagination or the thrill of the unknown. Or perhaps it was the simple human desire to explore, to connect, and to conquer challenges. Whatever it was, traders kept coming back, drawn to the road like moths to a flame. And let's not forget the haggling. Oh, the haggling. Watching two traders go at it over a single bolt of silk was like witnessing a verbal fencing match. Sharp wits, quicker tongues, and the occasional raised eyebrow were all part of the game. You could almost feel the tension in the air, thicker than a bowl of barley porridge. The stakes were high. One wrong move, and you could end up with a bad deal that would make even the camels wince. In many ways, life on the Silk Road was a study in contrast. It was a place where the romance of adventure met the harsh realities of survival, where each day brought a new challenge and opportunity. It was a world where fortunes could be made or lost with the roll of a dice, or the stubbornness of a camel. So, as you trudge along the dusty trail, remember that every step is a testament to human resilience and ambition. The Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was a crucible that tested the mettle of those who dared to traverse it. As you continue your journey, keep your wits about you, your goods secure, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make it to the next trading post with your fortune intact. The road is long, and the adventure is just beginning. The Silk Road. It's not just an ancient trade route, but the crossroads of innovation, culture, and let's be honest, a decent amount of chaos. As you trudge along with your caravan, you might notice that while your feet are firmly planted in the dust of the past, your mind is wandering through the vibrant exchange of ideas and technology that this road facilitated. Sure, you're wrestling with stubborn camels and unpredictable merchants, but there's more to this journey than meets the eye or the ledger. Let's chat about religion first. The Silk Road was like the spiritual expressway of the ancient world. Buddhism, for instance, didn't just meander its way from India to China on the back of some monk's good intentions. It was carried on the very backs of these trade caravans. By the 1st century CE, Buddhist monks were hitching rides with traders, spreading the Dharma like spiritual Jani apple seeds. And just like that, stupas and monasteries began cropping up along the route, offering weary travelers a place to rest their feet and maybe get some enlightenment on the side. Meanwhile, Islam took a slightly different route, entering Central Asia with a bit more fanfare and in many cases a sword. By the 8th century, Islamic culture was as much a part of the Silk Road as silks and spices. It was a spiritual potluck where everyone brought their own dish. But let's not get too carried away with the cumbear imagery. The exchange of ideas wasn't always as zen as a meditation retreat. Take, for example, the misunderstandings that arose when cultures collided. Imagine explaining the concept of reincarnation to someone who believes in a linear life and death cycle. It was like trying to explain modern art to a medieval knight. These weren't just quaint cultural exchanges. They were full-blown paradigm shifts that sometimes led to more confusion than clarity. And speaking of confusion, let's pivot to technology. One of the greatest gifts the Silk Road gave the West was papermaking, courtesy of our friends in China. By the 2nd century BCE, the Chinese had figured out how to turn mulberry bark into a writing surface that was far superior to papyrus or parchment. It took a few centuries, but by the time this technology reached the Islamic world in the 8th century and Europe by the 11th, it was revolutionizing everything from literature to bureaucracy. Imagine trying to run an empire with clay tablets. The mind boggles. Yet, while we celebrate the spread of papermaking, it's worth noting that not every technological exchange was so smooth. Consider gunpowder, another Chinese innovation that eventually found its way to Europe. What started as a quest for immortality, thanks to some adventurous Chinese alchemists, ended up as a tool of war that would reshape global power dynamics. Not exactly the harmonious exchange of ideas you might have hoped for, but then again, history loves a plot twist. So, how do we know all this? Enter the travelers, those intrepid souls who braved the Silk Road and left behind accounts that are part history, part travel blog. One such traveler was Xuanzang, a 7th century Chinese monk whose pilgrimage to India in search of Buddhist texts reads like an epic adventure. His detailed records give us a glimpse into the religious landscape of the Silk Road, not to mention some serious travel tips. Then there's Ibn Battuta, the 14th century Moroccan explorer who made even Marco Polo seem like a homebody. His accounts offer a unique perspective on the cultural exchanges and occasionally tense interactions that took place along these routes. But let's not romanticize the life of these travelers too much. Their journeys were fraught with danger and discomfort. Imagine crossing the Karakum Desert with nothing but a few camels and your wits, or navigating the political intrigues of foreign courts. And then there were the languages. Oh, the languages. Trying to haggle over the price of silk in a tongue you barely understand is like trying to order coffee in a Parisian cafe without knowing the word for coffee. Yet, despite the challenges, these travelers were drawn to the road like sailors to the sea. Perhaps it was the promise of discovery, or maybe it was the irresistible pull of the unknown. Whatever it was, their accounts remind us that the Silk Road was more than just a conduit for goods. It was a cultural tapestry, woven with the threads of countless human stories. In the end, the Silk Road was a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary coexisted in a delicate balance. It was a world where traders and travelers faced the harsh realities of survival, even as they contributed to the grand narrative of human history. And as you continue your journey, remember that each step you take echoes with the footsteps of those who came before, those who dared to dream, to explore, and to connect. The road ahead is long, but the adventure is far from over. As you kick up the dust on the Silk Road, it's time to talk politics, because what's a grand historical journey without a little political intrigue? Think of the Silk Road as the original game of Risk, where empires like the Han, Roman, and later the Mongols played for keeps, each vying for control over this vital trade artery. Forget about world domination through brute force alone. Trade was just as potent a weapon as any sword or spear. Now, let's rewind to the Han Dynasty, the trailblazers of the Silk Road. Around the 2nd century BCE, the Han were eager to extend their influence westward. They weren't just in it for the swag, though the silk trade was certainly a nice perk. They saw it as a way to counter the pesky Xiongnu Confederation to their north, a thorn in their side that made even the most resilient emperor reach for an extra cup of herbal tea. By trading with the Yuezhi, enemies of the Xiongnu, the Han were playing a sophisticated game of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And what better way to cement a friendship than with a few bolts of exquisite silk? Then there were the Romans, who, despite their toga-wearing bravado, were as hooked on silk as a 21st century influencer is on followers. Roman coffers hemorrhaged gold to pay for Chinese silk, much to the chagrin of moralists who worried about its effect on Roman virtue. Yeah, you heard that right. Silk was scandalous. Pliny the Elder even grumbled about Roman women flaunting silk garments that were so fine they might as well be wearing nothing. Scandalous indeed, Pliny. But while silk might not have toppled the Roman Empire, it did put a dent in their treasury, an economic Achilles heel, if you will. Fast forward to the Mongols, the Silk Road's unlikely champions. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, these nomadic conquerors created the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen. And guess what? They loved trade. They were like the world's first venture capitalists, providing a sort of Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and stability across the Silk Road that made it safer for traders to do their thing. Of course, the Mongols weren't exactly altruistic. They imposed their own taxes and tolls, ensuring a steady stream of revenue. But compared to the general chaos of the time, a little Mongol oversight was a small price to pay for the opportunity to make a fortune. Diplomacy and alliances played crucial roles in this high-stakes game. Trade routes weren't just highways for goods, they were lifelines for political negotiations. Alliances were often sealed with gifts of silk and spices, the ancient world's equivalent of a diplomatic handshake. A well-timed gift of saffron could open doors faster than any army could. But beware of those who didn't play nice. Tariffs and blockades were the political equivalent of a cold shoulder, and they could choke the life out of a trade route faster than you could say economic sanctions. Take the Sogdians, for instance, those savvy merchants from Central Asia who were the Silk Road's middlemen par excellence. These guys were the ultimate networkers, speaking multiple languages and navigating the tricky waters of trade diplomacy with finesse. They knew how to grease the wheels with the right gifts or a well-placed bribe, and when the going got tough, they'd switch their allegiances quicker than a game of musical chairs. Trade was as much about power as it was about profit. Empires knew that controlling trade routes meant controlling wealth, and with it, influence. This was more than just economics. It was a chessboard where each move could tip the balance of power. And unlike chess, the pieces were human lives, fortunes, and futures. The political landscape of the Silk Road was as shifting as the sands of the Taklamakan Desert. 1 minute, you're a respected trader with the ear of an emperor. The next, you're persona non grata because some border skirmish turned your trade route into a no-go zone. But while the political winds might blow hot and cold, they never stopped blowing. The allure of the Silk Road was simply too great. It was a place where fortunes could be made, alliances forged, and occasionally empires reshaped. So, as you continue your journey along these storied paths, remember that you're not just following in the footsteps of traders. You're walking the same routes trodden by diplomats, spies, and adventurers. The Silk Road was a stage where the drama of history played out in real time, a place where every grain of sand had a story to tell. And as you press on, who knows what tales of intrigue and opportunity await. The road is long, the stakes are high, and the next chapter of this grand adventure is just around the corner. The Silk Road, folks, where traders, diplomats, and the occasional spy played out history's version of a high-stakes poker game. But just when you think you've mastered the rules, someone changes the deck. Enter the late Middle Ages, and suddenly the Silk Road found itself upstaged by the maritime routes. Yes, the high seas were calling, and they weren't taking no for an answer. Around the 15th century, the Silk Road began to lose its luster, much like a once popular nightclub that just couldn't keep up with the trendy new spot down the block. The rise of maritime trade was a game-changer, and let's be honest, who wouldn't prefer the idea of a leisurely cruise over trekking through deserts with a stubborn camel? The Portuguese, those nautical trailblazers, opened up a sea route to India by sailing around Africa's Cape of Good Hope in 1498. This wasn't just a new route, it was a revolution. Suddenly, merchants could sidestep the landlocked perils of the Silk Road, bandits, tolls, and those darned unpredictable caravans, and trade directly by sea. This shift wasn't just a ripple, it was a tidal wave. Why did maritime trade catch on faster than a viral TikTok dance? Well, for starters, it was efficient. Ships could carry more goods at once than even the most ambitious camel caravan. We're talking tons of spices, textiles, and other goods, all loaded onto a single ship. And while sea voyages came with their own set of risks, storms, pirates, and the occasional bout of scurvy, at least the ocean didn't demand bribes at every port. Plus, cost of maritime shipping was significantly lower. A ship's crew might grumble about their rations, but they didn't require as many ongoing toll negotiations as a land caravan. The shift in trade routes also brought about a shift in power. Coastal cities like Lisbon and Amsterdam emerged as new hubs of commerce, overshadowing the once glorious cities along the Silk Road. It was as if the spotlight had moved from the deserts of Central Asia to the bustling ports of Europe. With this new focus, the economies of Europe swelled like a well-fed merchant after a successful voyage, while traditional Silk Road cities faced economic decline. Samarkand and Bukhara, once the jewels of the trade network, began to lose their shine. It was a harsh reality check. Adapt or become a footnote in history. But let's not write off the Silk Road just yet. Even as maritime trade took center stage, the Silk Road left a legacy that can still be felt today. It wasn't just about moving goods. It was about moving people, ideas, and cultures. The Silk Road was the internet of its time, a pre-digital network connecting diverse cultures and sparking a cross-pollination of ideas that would shape civilizations. The spread of technologies, religions, and even pandemics, hello, Black Death, are all testament to its lasting impact. Take the spread of paper-making, for instance. It started in China, and thanks to the Silk Road, reached the Islamic world before making its way to Europe. This tech transfer was like the original Kickstarter campaign, funding the spread of knowledge and bureaucracy. Or consider the transmission of art and architecture, with styles blending across the continents like a grand cultural smoothie. The Silk Road was history's greatest mash-up, long before the term became a buzzword. And let's not forget the culinary influences. Who doesn't love a good bowl of pasta? Well, thank the Silk Road for that, because the concept of noodles made its way from China to Italy, sparking debates over who really invented spaghetti. It's the kind of cultural exchange that makes you appreciate the Silk Road every time you twirl a forkful of fettuccine. So, while the Silk Road as a trade route may have faded into the annals of history, its spirit lives on in our interconnected world. The road taught us that trade isn't just about goods, it's about ideas and connections. It's about human curiosity and the desire to reach beyond the horizon to see what lies beyond. In a way, the Silk Road is still with us, just wearing a different hat. We've traded in our camels for cargo ships and airplanes, but the essence remains the same. And here's the kicker. Despite its decline, the fascination with the Silk Road endures. It's the kind of romantic notion that keeps historians, travelers, and dreamers alike enthralled. There's something about the idea of a vast, ancient trade network that captures our imagination, like a bedtime story that's too good to skip. It's a testament to humanity's enduring love for adventure, trade, and a good yarn. So, as you ponder the legacy of the Silk Road, remember that while the routes may have shifted, the spirit of discovery and connection continues. It's not just about where we've been, it's about where we're going. And who knows, maybe the next great trade route is just waiting to be discovered, hidden in plain sight. Until then, the Silk Road remains a testament to the power of trade and the enduring human spirit. Now, doesn't that make for a good travel story? The morning air in Aachen is crisp, almost biting. As a 9th century Carolingian monk, you're up before dawn, a time when the world is still cloaked in shadow and silence. Your day kicks off with a brisk walk to the Palatine Chapel, an architectural marvel that looms like a fortress in the dim light. Constructed under the watchful eye of Charlemagne, this place isn't just a chapel, it's the heart of an empire, the kind of place where politics and piety intertwine over whispered prayers and whispered deals. With its octagonal structure and towering dome, It's a testament to the ambition of a ruler who fancied himself a new Roman emperor. Inside, the chapel is a cavern of echoes. As you step in, the starkness is softened by flickering candlelight and the low hum of Latin chants. You're joining your fellow monks in the office of matins. It's a pre-dawn ritual, a symphony of solemnity that sets the tone for the day. The words you recite have been sung for centuries, a blend of devotion and discipline that keeps the monastic schedule tighter than a knight's grip on his sword. But let's not pretend this is just about spiritual enlightenment. The monks are the cultural engines of the Carolingian Renaissance, preserving knowledge like medieval data backup drives. After matins, it's off to breakfast. Now, don't get too excited. The morning meal is practical, not extravagant. It's bread and ale, your daily fuel. No, you haven't stumbled into a medieval happy hour. Ale is the safer choice than water, which is often more germ-infested than a medieval battlefield. The bread is dense, a hefty loaf that could double as a weapon if things got out of hand in the refectory. But it's sustenance, not indulgence. The monks here know that the real work begins after breakfast, and you need your energy, whether you're copying manuscripts or tilling the fields. Aachen is a hub of activity, a kind of medieval Silicon Valley, where ideas are as valuable as gold. Charlemagne loved this city, and it's not hard to see why. Its location at the crossroads of Europe makes it a strategic powerhouse, a place where culture and commerce collide. You're living in a time when the Carolingian Renaissance is in full swing, and the monks are the intellectual elite, the keepers of ancient texts and the creators of new ones. In the scriptoria, the air is thick with the smell of ink and the quiet rustle of parchment. You're not just copying texts, you're breathing life into a cultural revival that will echo through the ages. But let's not romanticize this too much. You're also contributing to the monastery's economy. Those manuscripts aren't just for the glory of God and Charlemagne, they're a commodity. Monasteries trade in knowledge, and each completed work can be a valuable asset. It's a reminder that even the lofty ideals of the Renaissance had their feet firmly planted in the muddy fields of economic reality. Now, speaking of fields, let's talk about the daily grind, literally. Flour is the lifeblood of your monastic existence, and you can bet there's a lot of work that goes into those loaves of bread you devour every morning. Milling flour is no easy task. In the monastery's mill, grains are ground between massive stones, turned by the power of water or sometimes, if you're unlucky, a monk-powered treadmill. The process is labor-intensive and noisy, the rhythmic thud of the millstones, a constant backdrop to your monastic duties. Once the flour is ready, it's off to the bakehouse. Here, the air is warm and filled with the comforting aroma of baking bread. It's a small respite, a moment of sensory delight in an otherwise ascetic day. But even this has its politics. Bread is a staple, a symbol of sustenance and stability. It's the literal and figurative foundation of your community. In the grand scheme of things, the bread you bake and the ale you brew keep the monastery self-sufficient, a microcosm of the larger Carolingian Empire. And let's not forget the power dynamics at play. Charlemagne's vision of a unified Christian Europe relied heavily on the monasteries, both as centers of learning and economic engines. You're part of a grand strategy, a living piece of the emperor's chessboard. Aachen is more than just your home. It's a symbol of a new world order, a place where the past and future meet in the present. As you move through your day, from prayer to work and back to prayer, you're reminded that even the quiet life of a monk is touched by the sweeping currents of history. As you shuffle from the mill to the scriptorium, there's a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like moving from the gritty grind of a medieval factory to the hallowed halls of a library. But don't get too cozy with the idea of tranquil study. The scriptorium is more like a monkish open-plan office, with all the distractions and none of the ergonomic chairs. Here, you're about to dive into the painstaking process of manuscript copying, a task as delicate as it is vital for the survival of classical knowledge. Now, let's talk materials. Forget paper. You're dealing with vellum, a luxury item made from calfskin. Each sheet takes the life of one young bovine, making your workspace smell faintly of a medieval butcher shop. It's not just a writing surface, it's a status symbol. The ink, concocted from oak galls, iron salts, and sometimes a dash of monkish ingenuity, is a testament to the alchemy of the age. This isn't just a matter of scribbling down notes, it's a sacred duty. Every stroke of your quill is an act of devotion, a bridge between the past and the future. But hold onto your hooded robe. Not every monk is a paragon of piety and precision. If you buy into the myth that all monks were saintly scholars, you're in for a reality check. Sure, some were dedicated to their craft, treating each manuscript like a holy relic. Others, though, were the medieval equivalent of slackers anonymous. Picture a monk with ink stains on his robe, more interested in doodling medieval memes in the margins than in preserving Aristotle. Yes, even in a world of quills and quietude, procrastination found a way. Now, let's put things into perspective. The Carolingian Renaissance, with its revival of learning and culture, is often painted with the brush of idealism. But the reality, like everything else, it was fueled by economics as much as enlightenment. Those manuscripts you're toiling over are as much a product as they are a passion project. A well-crafted manuscript can fetch a handsome price, turning your scriptorium into a medieval money spinner. Monasteries traded these precious texts like intellectual currency, ensuring that the written word spread far and wide, from Aachen to the far reaches of the empire. As you dip your quill into the inkwell, you can't help but feel the weight of your task. Each letter, each word is a link in the chain of human knowledge. You're not just copying texts, you're preserving the intellectual treasures of a bygone era. Without your efforts, the wisdom of the ancients might have vanished into the void, lost to the ravages of time and neglect. It's a legacy that extends beyond your monastic walls, a testament to the enduring power of the written word. But let's not sugarcoat it. The work is tedious, a marathon of monotony that tests your patience and perseverance. Hours blend into days, weeks into months, as you labor over your manuscripts. It's a grind, yes, but one with purpose. You're part of a grand experiment, an intellectual renaissance that seeks to revive the glory of Rome in a world still emerging from its dark ages. The scriptorium is a place of paradoxes, where silence reigns but ideas roar. It's a hive of activity, with monks working side by side, each lost in their own world of words. The air is filled with the soft scratch of quills, and the occasional muttered curse, as an errant ink blot ruins an otherwise perfect page. It's a reminder that even in a place of such high ideals, the mundane realities of human error persist. And let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung heroes of this story. While Charlemagne and his courtly entourage bask in the limelight of history, it's the monks who are the real MVPs here. Their tireless efforts in scriptoria across Europe ensure that the wisdom of the ancients survives the tumult of the times. They are the quiet custodians of culture, the anonymous architects of a legacy that will shape the future of a continent. But as with any story, there's more than meets the eye. The scriptorium isn't just a place of scholarly pursuits. It's a microcosm of monastic life, complete with its own social hierarchies and power plays. The abbot, with his eagle eye for detail, is the ultimate arbiter of quality control, ensuring that every manuscript meets the exacting standards of the monastery. Beneath him, a hierarchy of scribes, each with their own role to play, from the lowly apprentice to the seasoned master scribe. As the morning sun creeps higher in the sky, you find yourself lost in the rhythm of the work, the steady cadence of copying easing you into a meditative state. It's a moment of calm in an otherwise chaotic world, a chance to lose yourself in the beauty of the written word. You might even allow yourself a small smile, a flicker of satisfaction at the thought that your efforts are not in vain. That somewhere, someday, someone will read the words you've painstakingly transcribed and find inspiration in their timeless wisdom. And just like that, mid-morning slips away. The scriptorium, with its whispering walls and ink-stained desks, has become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the past and the present collide in a symphony of silence. You're a part of history, a living link in the chain of knowledge that stretches back centuries and will continue to stretch forward, shaping the world in ways you can't begin to imagine. But don't get too comfortable. The day is far from over, and the world outside the scriptorium awaits. Each page you finish is a step closer to an afternoon of new challenges and revelations, where the lessons of history are as fresh and vibrant as the ink that stains your fingers. Stay tuned, because the journey through the life of a Carolingian monk is just beginning to unfold. As you step out of the scriptorium, blinking at the sun that's now claiming its midday glory, you can almost hear your stomach grumbling louder than the abbey bells. It's time for lunch, a moment of respite before diving headfirst into the economic intricacies of monastic life. Now, lunch in a 9th century monastery isn't exactly a gourmet affair. Picture a frugal spread of bread, cheese, and maybe a piece of fruit if the season's right. Simple, yet somehow satisfying. It's a reminder that the monks, despite their intellectual pursuits, aren't above the daily grind of mundane survival. Speaking of survival, let's pull back the curtain on the economic machinery that keeps this monastic community running smoother than a well-oiled trebuchet. Sure, when you think of monks, you might envision serene souls cloistered away in prayer and study. But here's the kicker. Monasteries were medieval megacorporations, managing vast tracts of land and a small army of serfs. It's like the Google of the Middle Ages, but with more robes and less free Wi-Fi. Let's talk numbers. A typical monastery could hold rights to thousands of acres of land, with your very own abbey in Aachen likely controlling a sprawling estate. Imagine a patchwork of fields stretching as far as the eye can see, dotted with villages where serfs till the soil under the watchful eye of the abbot. And these weren't just small-time operations. Some monasteries rivaled the wealth of the nobility, amassing riches through a combination of shrewd management and what we'll call divine persuasion. Now, here's a fun fact. Tithes and donations were the lifeblood of this operation. Picture a medieval Kickstarter campaign, but instead of funding your friend's avant-garde puppet show, it's about ensuring the monks have their daily bread, and occasionally a little more. Every faithful villager was expected to cough up 1/10 of their produce or earnings to the church, a practice that filled the monastery's coffers faster than you can say sanctified tax. And let's not forget those generous nobles who, either out of piety or a strategic bid for heavenly brownie points, donated land and wealth to these religious powerhouses. Now, before you start picturing monks swimming in gold like Scrooge McDuck, let's sprinkle in a dash of reality. While the abbey did enjoy certain luxuries, a well-stocked library, perhaps the occasional sumptuous feast, these were exceptions, not the rule. After all, the monastic vow of poverty wasn't just a charming suggestion. It was a serious commitment. Even then, who can resist the allure of a little indulgence now and then? Human nature, after all, is as unchanging as the tides. Of course, the economic success of monasteries wasn't solely due to divine intervention or the generosity of their flock. It was also about getting your hands dirty, literally. You see, the monks didn't just pray and copy manuscripts. They worked the land, sowing and harvesting alongside their serfs. It's a stark reminder that medieval self-sufficiency wasn't just a quaint concept. It was a necessity. Picture yourself in the fields, sleeves rolled up, dirt under your nails, a far cry from the quiet contemplation of the scriptorium. It's back-breaking work, the kind that leaves your muscles aching and your back sore. Farming techniques were rudimentary at best, with wooden plows and oxen doing the heavy lifting. Forget about fancy John Deere tractors. This is agriculture, unplugged. But despite the toil, there's a certain satisfaction in seeing the fruits of your labor take root, a tangible reward for your sweat and effort. And let's not forget the seasonal rhythm that dictated your every move. From the sowing of seeds in spring to the harvest in autumn, each task was a dance with nature, requiring precision and planning. It's a reminder that in a world without supermarkets, your next meal depended on the whims of the weather and the fertility of the soil. One bad harvest could spell disaster for the community, a harsh reality that kept everyone on their toes. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This system of self-sufficiency wasn't just about survival. It was also a statement of independence. By producing their own food, monks reduced their reliance on external sources, ensuring the monastery could weather the storms of famine and political upheaval. It's a strategy as shrewd as it was pragmatic, a testament to the monks' adaptability and foresight. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. The fieldwork was grueling, a far cry from the romanticized vision of pastoral bliss. It was a constant battle against pests, disease, and the elements. And remember, this wasn't just busy work. The produce from these fields fed not only the monks, but also the serfs and lay workers who kept the monastery ticking. It was a delicate balance, a juggling act of resources and responsibilities. As the afternoon sun dips in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow. It's been a long day, but there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that your efforts have contributed to something greater. The monastery isn't just a place of worship and learning. It's a community, a microcosm of the medieval world where faith, labor, and economy intertwine in a symphony of survival. But the day isn't over yet. As you head back to the abbey, dust clinging to your robes, you can't help but marvel at the intricate web of connections that sustains this place. It's a reminder that even in the quiet life of a monk, the forces of history are ever present, shaping your world in ways both subtle and profound. And as the evening draws near, you find yourself looking forward to the next chapter in this unfolding saga, where the lessons of the past and the challenges of the present continue to collide in unexpected ways. As dusk creeps over the horizon, wrapping Archon in a cloak of twilight, you shuffle from the fields back to the abbey, your mind turning from the tangible toil of agriculture to the more ethereal labor of theological study. Here's where things get delightfully cerebral, a mental workout that makes your muscles ache just thinking about it. The afternoon is where the real intellectual heavy lifting happens, and you're about to engage in the kind of theological debates that would make a modern-day Reddit thread look like a friendly chat over tea. Now, let's set the scene. You're gathered in a dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of wax and the low hum of scholarly discourse. It's a meeting of minds, a medieval think tank where the finest intellects of the Carolingian era come to flex their mental muscles. And trust me, these guys are serious about their doctrines. We're talking about debates over the nature of Christ, the intricacies of the Trinity, and other theological puzzles that could make your head spin faster than a monk on a holy day ale binge. This is where you meet the big players, like Alcuin of York, the rock star of Carolingian intellectual life. Alcuin was Charlemagne's go-to guy for all things scholarly, kind of like the medieval version of having Stephen Hawking on speed dial. Alcuin's influence was monumental. He reformed the educational system and pushed for the revival of classical learning. He's the reason you're not just tilling fields, but also engaging in highbrow theological debates. You can blame or thank him for those long hours spent pondering the divine. Under Charlemagne, and with Alcuin's guidance, the Carolingian Renaissance transformed education. Schools popped up like mushrooms after rain, attached to cathedrals and monasteries, teaching the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Picture a medieval Hogwarts, minus the magic but with plenty of Latin grammar drills. The goal, to create a literate clergy that could read and interpret the Bible without accidentally starting a new heresy. And speaking of heresies, let's dive into that medieval quagmire. You see, theological disputes in the 9th century were the medieval equivalent of today's internet flame wars. Passionate, endless, and often missing the point entirely. Heresy trials were the arena where these intellectual gladiators clashed. And let me tell you, they took their disputes to absurd lengths, got a slightly different interpretation of a biblical passage. Congratulations, you're now a heretic. Better get ready for a trial that could rival the dramatic flair of a Shakespearean play. Take the adoptionism controversy, for example. This debate raged like a wildfire through the Carolingian Empire, with one side arguing that Christ, in his humanity, was only the adopted Son of God. It sounds like a theological footnote, right? But back then, it was a hot-button issue that could get you branded a heretic faster than you can say, Council of Frankfurt. This council, held in 794, convened to address this very issue, and was a who's who of the ecclesiastical world. Imagine the medieval version of a UN summit, but with more incense and less diplomacy. These debates weren't just academic exercises. They shaped the fabric of medieval society. Theological correctness was tied to political power, and getting it wrong could mean exile, or worse. It was a high-stakes game, where the winners wrote the history books, and the losers were footnotes in the annals of heresy. The intellectual rigor of these debates helped solidify the doctrines that would define Western Christianity for centuries to come, but not without a fair share of drama and intrigue. The Carolingian reforms, led by Charlemagne and executed by luminaries like Alcuin, weren't just about creating a literate clergy. They aimed to unify the empire under a single set of religious and cultural norms, a medieval version of brand consistency. The empire was vast, stretching from the Pyrenees to the Danube, and ensuring everyone was on the same theological page was no small feat. Imagine trying to coordinate a group project with participants scattered across Europe. each with their own dialect and interpretations of the Nicene Creed. It's enough to make even the most patient monk reach for a stronger brew. Education was key to this unity, and the Carolingian Renaissance laid the groundwork for a more educated clergy, and by extension, a more cohesive empire. Texts were standardized, literacy rates improved, relatively speaking, and a cultural revival was underway. The intellectual legacy of this period is immense, setting the stage for the later developments of the High Middle Ages and even the Renaissance. But let's not get carried away with Romanticism. These reforms also had their limits, and the reality was often messier than the ideal. Literacy didn't magically spread to every peasant hut. It was primarily the domain of the clergy and the elite. The rest of the population was more concerned with the day-to-day challenges of survival, like ensuring the next harvest didn't fail, or that the neighboring lord didn't decide your village looked ripe for plundering. Yet, even with these limitations, the Carolingian Renaissance was a beacon of progress in a world still reeling from the collapse of the Roman Empire. It was a time when the seeds of future intellectual and cultural developments were sown, nurtured by the likes of Alcuin and his contemporaries. It's a reminder that even in the most turbulent times, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding can light the way forward. As you wrap up your afternoon of theological debate, your head buzzing with new ideas and doctrines, you can't help but marvel at the sheer complexity of it all. The Carolingian world was one of contrasts, where the holy and the mundane intertwined in a dance as intricate as any illuminated manuscript. And as you prepare to return to the quiet contemplation of evening prayers, you carry with you the knowledge that you are part of something greater, a living tapestry of faith, learning, and history woven together by the hands of time. But don't get too comfortable. The day's not done yet. The Abbey's walls have more stories to tell, more lessons to impart as the evening unfolds. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the echoes of the past continue to resonate in the present, shaping the world in ways that only history can. As you slip into the Abbey for evening prayers, the air is tinged with a sense of calm inevitability, like the final act of a well-worn play. The day's exertions fade into the background as you settle into the rhythm of Vespers. The flickering candlelight dances across the stone walls, a serene backdrop to the chants that rise and fall like a gentle tide. It's the perfect antidote to the cerebral gymnastics of the afternoon, bringing your thoughts back to the here and now, grounding you in the rituals that have defined your life. Vespers is the time to reflect, a pause button on the relentless march of time. Here, amidst the chants and the silence, you find yourself pondering the intricate web of politics and piety that has shaped your world. Charlemagne's empire is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition and devotion, a place where the sacred and the secular are two sides of the same coin. It's a reminder that even in a world of divine aspirations, earthly power is never far from the monastery's doorstep. As the prayers draw to a close, you're led to the refectory for supper. Now, don't get your hopes up for a medieval banquet. The evening meal is a modest affair, a reminder that even in the corridors of power, simplicity reigns. Picture a bowl of pottage, thick and hearty, accompanied by a slice of that ever-present bread. It's sustenance, not indulgence, a testament to the monk's vow of poverty, and a stark contrast to the opulence of the emperor's feasts. But as you break bread with your fellow monks, you can't help but think about the political machinations that swirl around you. The Carolingian court is a hive of intrigue, where alliances are forged and broken with the flick of a quill. Charlemagne's court was a medieval Game of Thrones, where the stakes were nothing less than the future of Christendom. The monks, though seemingly removed from these machinations, played their part as advisors, scribes, and emissaries. Their influence felt far beyond the cloistered walls of the abbey. The legacy of the Carolingian monks is a paradox, a blend of faith and pragmatism that laid the groundwork for Europe's medieval transformation. They were the custodians of knowledge, the preservers of ancient wisdom in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. Their scriptoria were the factories of the mind, churning out manuscripts that would become the bedrock of Western learning. But they were also economic engines, their abbeys hubs of commerce and agriculture, sustaining their communities, and by extension, the empire itself. It's tempting to romanticize the monastic life, to envision it as a serene idyll of prayer and contemplation. But the reality, it's a gritty, unvarnished existence, where the demands of survival are as relentless as the turning of the seasons. The monks were more than just holy men. They were farmers, scribes, and businessmen, juggling the demands of faith with the harsh realities of medieval life. Their world was one of contrasts, where the divine and the mundane coexisted in a delicate balance. As you prepare for bed, the day's events swirl in your mind, a tapestry of memories and reflections. You find yourself questioning the notion of monkhood as a life of simple devotion. The monks were complex figures, their lives shaped by the interplay of faith and power, idealism and pragmatism. They were the architects of a legacy that would echo through the ages, their influence felt in the corridors of power and the quiet corners of the abbey alike. The romanticized vision of monkhood is a comforting myth, a narrative that glosses over the sacrifices and struggles that defined their lives. But it's in the gritty reality of their existence that the true legacy of the Carolingian monks can be found. They were the unsung heroes of a transformative era, their blend of spirituality and practicality laying the groundwork for the cultural and intellectual revival that would shape the future of Europe. As you drift off to sleep, the world outside the abbey fades away, leaving you with a sense of connection to the past and the future. The monks of Aachen were more than just figures in an ancient story. They were pioneers, their lives a testament to the enduring power of faith, knowledge, and resilience. And as the night envelops the abbey, you carry with you the knowledge that your place in this grand tapestry is secure, a living link in the chain of history that stretches from the past into the infinite possibilities of the future. In the dizzying heights of the Andes, where oxygen levels flirt with the concept of scarcity, the Incan Empire wove its legacy, quite literally, into history. It's a tale spun with the fibers of alpacas and llamas, creatures that were as vital to the Incans as Wi-Fi is to us today. Now, before you start thinking of these animals as plush toys grazing on mountain pastures, let's clarify. Alpacas and llamas are more like the sturdy, unyielding types who'd rather spit in your face than cuddle. Yet, they were the backbone of a civilization that stretched over 500 miles of South American terrain. The Incans were no strangers to the art of making the most out of what they had, and boy, did they have altitude, up to 11,000 feet above sea level, to be precise. That's higher than the highest peaks in some countries, where even taking a leisurely stroll might leave you gasping for breath. But for the Incans, this was just another day at the office. And what an office it was, filled with the rhythm of looms and the vibrant colors of dyes extracted from the most unlikely of sources, like cochineal bugs. Yes, they turned bug juice into art, and if that's not resourceful, I don't know what is. Before the Spaniards ever laid eyes on this mountainous empire, the Incans had developed a textile industry that was, frankly, the envy of the ancient world. We're talking about fabrics so fine they could rival today's luxury brands. And these weren't just for show. Textiles were the currency of the realm, a symbol of wealth and power, and even a tool of diplomacy. Incan rulers would gift finely woven cloth to neighboring leaders, a gesture that said, "We come in peace, but check out our superior weaving skills." But how did they manage this at such vertiginous altitudes? Well, the Incans possessed an intimate understanding of their environment, one that modern scientists are still trying to fully grasp. They engineered terraces that hugged the mountainsides, creating microclimates where the best fibers could be cultivated. In a world where the elements were as much a foe as a friend, the Incans played the long game, adapting to nature's quirks rather than trying to conquer them outright. And then there were the weavers themselves. In Incan society, weaving wasn't just a craft, it was a calling. These artists were the rock stars of their time, wielding their spindles and looms like a maestro conducting an orchestra. The best weavers were considered among the elite, their skills a passport to privilege and respect. It's as if being a weaver was the ancient equivalent of being a Silicon Valley tech guru, holding the keys to the empire's economic engine. The materials themselves were as precious as gold. Llama and alpaca fibers were the raw materials, with their soft texture and insulating properties making them the perfect choice for high-altitude living. And let's not forget the vicuña, the elusive cousin of the llama, whose fleece was reserved for royalty due to its rarity and softness. A single vicuña could produce just a handful of fleece, making garments made from this fiber the ultimate status symbol. It's like wearing a garment made from unicorn hair, minus the mythical creature. So, as we unravel the threads of Incan textile weaving, we're left with a picture of a society that knew how to blend art with practicality. They didn't just make cloth. They crafted a cultural tapestry that told the story of their world, a world where every thread had a purpose, and every weave was a testament to their ingenuity. As we continue this journey, remember, these aren't just textiles. They're the woven whispers of an empire that conquered the mountains. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the Incan textile process, where the magic of weaving was more than just a flick of a loom. It all started with those plant dyes that could make a peacock blush. Picture this. The Incans didn't just dip their threads in any old juice. They concocted their colors from nature's own palette. We're talking about reds from cochineal bugs, yellows from the sunny hues of chilca leaves, and blues from indigo plants. These weren't just colors. They were the high-definition displays of their era. To call this process labor-intensive would be like saying Mount Everest is a bit of a climb. The myth of the effortless weaver sipping on chicha under a full moon is just that, a myth. In reality, the creation of these textiles was a marathon, not a sprint. It required a Herculean effort, with weavers dedicating countless hours to dyeing, spinning, and weaving each piece. This was an assembly line of artistry, where one wrong move could unravel hours of work. In fact, a single piece of cloth could take months, even years, to complete. It's the ancient equivalent of writing a symphony by hand. No shortcuts, no copy-paste. And let's not gloss over the patterns. Oh, the patterns. These weren't your run-of-the-mill stripes and polka dots. We're talking about geometric designs so intricate that they make modern algorithms look like finger paintings. Each pattern held a meaning, a story, a status update, if you will. They were the original tweets, conveying messages about lineage, status, and even political allegiances. For the Incans, wearing a certain pattern was like walking around with a neon sign announcing, "I'm kind of big deal." But let's not romanticize the whole affair. The reality was far from glamorous. Incan weavers were often subject to the whims of the ruling elite, who demanded nothing less than perfection. This wasn't just art for art's sake. It was art for survival's sake. The pressure to produce flawless work was immense, and failure was not an option. Weavers were the unsung heroes of their society, their nimble fingers working tirelessly to maintain the empire's social fabric, quite literally. And then there was the symbolism. Every thread was imbued with meaning. In Incan society, textiles were more than just clothes. They were a narrative, a biography woven into the very fabric of life. The patterns and colors were like a visual language, speaking volumes about the wearer's place in the world. It's as if each garment was a walking CV, a personal brand statement that could make or break one's social standing. The Incans didn't just wear their textiles, they lived them. They were the Instagram of antiquity, a social media feed made from warp and weft. Each piece was a humble brag, a way to say, "Look at what I have achieved," or "This is where I belong." And just like today's influencers, the Incans understood the power of visual storytelling. Their textiles were a way to broadcast their identity, achievements, and aspirations to the world. This wasn't mere vanity. It was a strategic display of power and prestige. Textiles were a currency of their own, a way to negotiate alliances and assert dominance. The Incan elite used these woven masterpieces as tools of diplomacy, trading them with neighboring tribes in a game of sartorial chess. It was a world where the threads of diplomacy were as important as the threads of the loom. But let's not forget the economics of it all. This wasn't just art for art's sake. It was a cornerstone of the Incan economy. The textile industry was a well-oiled machine, with its own hierarchy and division of labor. From the spindle whirlers to the master weavers, each played a crucial role in keeping the empire clothed and content. It was a system that balanced artistry with pragmatism, a testament to the Incans' ability to blend beauty with functionality. So, as we continue to unravel the threads of Incan weaving, it becomes clear that these weren't just textiles. They were the woven whispers of a culture that understood the power of the loom. The Incans didn't just weave cloth. They wove a narrative, legacy, and a social structure that was as intricately connected as the threads they spun. And as we delve deeper into this story, remember, these aren't just patterns. They're the encoded messages of an empire that knew how to speak through fabric. The Incan Empire wasn't just about pretty patterns and vibrant colors. It was a masterclass in economic wizardry. Those textiles were more than fabric. They were the empire's version of Bitcoin, a currency woven into the very seams of society. In a world where gold might weigh you down and coins were scarce, the Incans spun their wealth into cloth. Talk about wearable assets. This wasn't just about keeping warm in the Andean chill. It was about keeping the empire's economy sizzling. The Incans didn't have a traditional market economy, but what they did have was a barter system that would put any modern-day swap meet to shame. Here, textiles were the MVPs, traded for everything from food to labor. A finely woven piece could score you a llama or even secure your labor force during harvest time. Forget credit cards. Your wardrobe was your wealth portfolio. And just like today's stock market, these textiles had their own trends, with styles and patterns that could make or break your social standing. And then we have the quippers, the Incan answer to Excel spreadsheets, but with a bit more flair. Imagine a system where knots on strings could tally up your empire's assets, track your taxes, and even keep your population census in check. No need for calculators when you have quippers. These knotted strings were the bureaucratic backbone of the Incan administration, a genius solution to record-keeping in a world without written language. They were the ultimate multitaskers, seamlessly blending artistry with utility in a way that would make your average office software blush. Now, it's easy to romanticize the simplicity of a barter system, but let's not forget the complexity lurking beneath the surface. The Incans didn't just trade textiles for the fun of it. It was a strategic maneuver to keep the empire running smoothly. The government controlled textile production, ensuring that the right amount of cloth was available to fuel the economy. This wasn't laissez-faire capitalism. It was a meticulously managed operation, with the state as the puppet master pulling the strings. It was as if the Incans had cracked the code of centrally planned economies long before economists could even spell macroeconomics. And there's the political angle. Textiles were more than just economic currency. They were political tools, wielded with precision by the ruling elite. A gift of cloth wasn't just a gesture of goodwill. It was a diplomatic chess move, a way to forge alliances and secure loyalties. In a world where words were as fleeting as the mountain winds, textiles spoke volumes, broadcasting messages of power and prestige to neighboring tribes. It was diplomacy dressed in finery, and the Incans were the masters of this sartorial statecraft. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with this system. The weavers, while respected for their skills, were often at the mercy of the elite, their talents exploited for the empire's gain. It was a world where the pressures of perfection weighed heavy, and failure wasn't just a personal setback. It could mean the difference between prosperity and poverty for entire communities. The romantic image of the carefree artisan, spinning yarns in the sun, is a myth as tangled as the strings of a quipu. The reality was a high-stakes game of skill, where the margins for error were as narrow as the mountain passes. The Incans didn't just build an economy, they wove it, using their textiles as the threads that bound their society together. It was a system that balanced artistry with economics, beauty with bureaucracy, and it was all held together by the genius of their innovation. As we continue to unravel this story, we'll see how these woven wonders weren't just the fabric of their lives, but the very foundation of an empire that defied the odds and the altitudes to create a legacy that still resonates today. And let's not ignore the sheer logistical brilliance of it all. The Incans managed an empire that spanned diverse climates and geographies, each region contributing its own unique materials and styles to the textile tableau. From the coastal cotton to the highland wool, the Incans orchestrated a supply chain that would put modern logistics companies to shame. It was a symphony of resources, with each region playing its part in the grand economic overture. This wasn't just local color. It was a vast network of trade that kept the empire's heart beating. The Incans understood that their textiles were more than just commodities. They were cultural ambassadors, each piece a testament to the diversity and ingenuity of the empire. Every garment was a conversation, a dialogue that transcended spoken language to communicate identity and allegiance. In a world where the landscape was as rugged as the people who inhabited it, textiles served as the connective tissue, knitting together disparate communities into a cohesive whole. But like any economy, it wasn't without its challenges. The Incans faced the constant threat of scarcity, with droughts and natural disasters threatening to unravel the delicate balance they had achieved. Yet they adapted, using their textiles not only as a means of trade, but also as a reserve, a buffer against the unpredictable whims of nature. It was a strategy born of necessity, a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. And as we peel back the layers of this intricate economic tapestry, we begin to see the true genius of the Incan system. It was a world where textiles were more than just clothes. They were the currency, the communication, and the cultural capital that fueled an empire. The Incans didn't just weave fabric. They wove a civilization, crafting a legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue. So, as we wrap up this segment of our journey through Incan history, remember that these textiles were more than just the threads of a loom. They were the lifeblood of an empire, the woven wonders that tied together the disparate elements of a civilization that thrived in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. And as we continue to explore the fascinating story of the Incas, see how these textiles played a crucial role in shaping the destiny of a people who dared to conquer the mountains. And speaking of those woven wonders, let's dive headfirst into the colorful kaleidoscope of Incan textile artistry, where the myths are as tangled as the threads themselves. We've all heard the tales of the serene Incan weaver, basking in the glow of artistic inspiration as they effortlessly create masterpieces. But let's untangle this yarn of romanticism, shall we? Reality was a lot more sweat and a lot less serenade. For starters, being an Incan weaver wasn't just about expressing oneself through art. It was a job, and not the kind where you could slack off and hope no one noticed. The Incan social hierarchy had a clear message: produce perfection or prepare to face the consequences. It's not like they had a union to turn to if the workload became too heavy. Weaving was serious business, with expectations as high as the Andes, and these expectations were set in part by the Incan rulers who spun a PR campaign that would make modern marketers take notes. They understood that textiles weren't just about fashion, they were about influence. Imagine strutting into a room wearing a garment that didn't just make you look good, but announced your divine right to rule. Incan rulers wore textiles as a second skin, using them to broadcast their power and control. If clothes make the man, then in the Incan Empire they made the god. Take the Sapa Inca, the head honcho himself, who was considered a living deity. His garments were woven from the finest vicuña fibers, a privilege so exclusive it was practically a divine right. These outfits weren't just about looking good, they were about projecting authority. Every thread was a statement of power, each color a command. To see the Sapa Inca in his full regalia was to witness a walking tapestry of political prowess. And let's not forget the religious and ceremonial roles these textiles played. They weren't just for keeping warm during a chilly Andean night. These fabrics were imbued with spiritual significance, used in rituals that connected the Incans to their gods. Textiles were offered to the deities, draped over sacred idols, and used in ceremonies that marked everything from harvests to victories in battle. They were, in every sense, the fabric of life. But let's not weave a fairy tale here. The reality was far from the idealized image of a harmonious society draped in beautiful cloth. The production of these textiles was a laborious process, demanding precision and dedication. It was a high-stakes game, where a single mistake could unravel not just a garment, but the social standing of those involved. Weavers were expected to deliver nothing short of perfection, and the pressure was immense. The romantic notion of a weaver serenely creating art under a starlit sky is a myth as tangled as an unkempt loom. In truth, these artisans worked tirelessly, their fingers dancing over looms in a relentless pursuit of excellence. They didn't have the luxury of artistic whimsy. Their task was to produce textiles that met the exacting standards of their rulers. It was a world where creativity met conformity, with little room for error. And yet, despite the harsh realities, there was a certain allure to the life of an Incan weaver. The best among them were held in high esteem, their skills a passport to privilege. But this respect came at a price. The weavers were at the mercy of their patrons, who could make or break their livelihoods with a single word. It was a precarious existence, where the line between success and failure was as thin as the threads they spun. In the grand tapestry of Incan society, textiles were more than just fabric. They were the currency of power, the language of diplomacy, and the medium of spiritual connection. The Incans didn't just wrap themselves in cloth. They wrapped themselves in stories, in status, in a narrative that defined their place in the world. It was a world where textiles were not just woven, but written, each piece a chapter in the epic saga of an empire. So, as we continue to unravel the intricate patterns of Incan textile artistry, remember that behind every beautiful garment was a story of labor, of expectation, of a society that demanded the best from its artisans. The Incans didn't just wear their history, they wove it, creating a legacy that was as enduring as the mountains they called home. And as we delve deeper into this tale, we'll see how these textiles were more than just the sum of their threads. They were the expression of an empire, a culture, and a people who understood the power of the loom. As we weave our way to the conclusion of this Incan textile tapestry, let's tackle the not-so-gentle unraveling courtesy of our uninvited guests from the Iberian Peninsula, the Spanish conquistadors. These guys weren't exactly there for a cultural exchange program. They had a knack for bulldozing civilizations with all the subtlety of a herd of llamas in a china shop. The Spanish, led by Francisco Pizarro, stumbled onto the Incan Empire in the early 16th century and saw gold everywhere, literally and figuratively. But while they were busy filling their pockets with shiny stuff, they also inadvertently tried to tear apart the intricate fabric of Incan society. The Conquest wasn't just a land grab, it was a cultural earthquake that sought to shake the very foundations of Incan life, including their beloved textiles. Now, the Spanish had their own ideas about fashion, and let's just say the Incan style didn't quite fit into their Eurocentric vision. The conquistadors were more about plundering gold than appreciating the artistry of a fine alpaca weave. They imposed their own fashions and textiles, a move that was less about style and more about stamping out indigenous identity. They were like the original fast fashion, with all the charm of a clearance rack sale. But here's where the story takes a turn worthy of a plot twist. Despite the Spanish attempts to unravel the Incan way of life, the textile tradition didn't just disappear into the Andean mists. Oh no, it was more resilient than a vicuña in a snowstorm. The Incans, ever resourceful, found ways to adapt and preserve their weaving techniques, passing them down through generations like a secret family recipe. Fast forward to modern times, and these ancient methods are experiencing a renaissance. Today, you can find Peruvian artisans using the same techniques their ancestors perfected centuries ago. It's a testament to cultural resilience, a middle finger to historical oppression wrapped in a beautifully woven shawl. And let's not forget the modern appreciation for these ancient arts. In a world where mass production is the norm, handmade Incan textiles are like a breath of fresh Andean air. They're celebrated for their quality, creativity, and connection to a rich cultural heritage. It's like owning a piece of history, one that you can drape over your shoulders and wear to your next history-themed cocktail party. Economically, these textiles have become a boon for local communities. Artisans today sell their work in global markets, providing a sustainable income while keeping traditions alive. It's a modern-day barter system, only this time, instead of trading for llamas, they're trading for fair wages and cultural recognition. It's a small but significant victory in the long game of cultural survival. These modern-day weavers are like the rock stars of the artisan world. Each piece they create a riff on an ancient melody. They preserve the knowledge of their ancestors while adding their own contemporary flair. It's a beautiful blend of past and present, a reminder that while history can be rewritten, it can also be celebrated. Yet, as we admire the legacy of Incan textiles, let's not forget the harsh realities. These artisans faced challenges that their ancestors could scarcely have imagined: globalization, climate change, and the ever-looming threat of cultural appropriation. It's a delicate balance, maintaining authenticity while adapting to a world that moves at the speed of a high-speed loop. In the end, the story of Incan textiles is one of survival, adaptation, and the enduring appeal of a well-crafted thread. It's a reminder that even in the face of conquest and cultural erasure, the human spirit can weave a legacy as strong and vibrant as the textiles themselves. The Incans didn't just leave us a history, they left us a living tradition, one that continues to inspire and intrigue. So, as you wrap yourself in a modern-day Incan textile, think of it as more than just a piece of fabric. It's a connection to a civilization that defied the odds and the altitudes to create something truly extraordinary. It's a testament to the power of art to transcend time, to speak across centuries, and to remind us of the beauty and resilience of the human spirit. And that's a legacy worth celebrating, one thread at a time. In the vibrant swirl of 16th century India, where empires clashed like titans in a cosmic wrestling match, a young boy named Akbar found himself thrust into the spotlight in a way he probably hadn't rehearsed. At just 13 years old, most kids might be wrestling with algebra or trying to figure out how to ask someone to the village dance. Not Akbar. He was busy taking over an empire. Imagine being a teenager, and instead of acne outbreaks, you're dealing with rebellious nobles and plotting generals. Sounds like a Netflix drama waiting to happen, doesn't it? Akbar's rise to power was as unexpected as a Bollywood plot twist. Born in 1542 in a dusty Rajput fortress, he was the son of Humayun, the second Mughal emperor, who had a knack for losing his throne more often than most people lose their car keys. When Humayun stumbled into an accidental death, no, seriously, he tripped on his royal robes. Akbar was off hunting in the wilderness, probably pondering the existential question of whether to aim for the deer or the pheasant. Instead, he got a call, a hurried messenger on horseback, telling him he was now the emperor. Talk about a career change. The political landscape Akbar inherited was nothing short of a disaster movie. The Mughal Empire was essentially Humpty Dumpty after the fall, with regional warlords eyeing the pieces like hungry hyenas. The dynasty was in tatters, and the empire was a patchwork quilt of chaos. To stabilize his rule, Akbar needed a win, a big one. Enter the Battle of Panipat in 1556. If you think your job is stressful, try leading an army of diverse warriors with their own agendas against a seasoned Afghan king. This wasn't Akbar's first rodeo, though. Despite his age, he had a mind sharp enough to slice through the Gordian knot of Indian politics. The battlefield was a brutal chessboard, and Akbar was ready to move his knights. With Behram Khan, his guardian and military brainiac, by his side, Akbar faced Hemu, who was the kind of guy who had already crowned himself king before the battle was even over. Confidence is key, right? In this epic clash, Hemu's forces were strong, numbering around 30, all set to bulldoze over Akbar's much smaller army. But Akbar had a secret weapon, gunpowder. While Hemu relied on traditional elephants and cavalry, Akbar's forces had cannons. The sound of cannon fire was music to Akbar's ears, though probably not to Hemu's, whose war elephants were probably wondering when they'd signed up for such a gig. The battle was fierce, and legend has it that an arrow struck Hemu in the eye, which, if true, was as unlucky as it gets. The result, Akbar's forces triumphed, and Hemu was captured, paving the way for Akbar's rule. This victory wasn't just a personal win. It was a statement to the world that the Mughal Empire was not only back in business, but under new, competent management. The Battle of Panipat was Akbar's ticket to legitimacy, a thrilling demonstration of his military savvy and his ability to adapt to new technologies. The kid had a knack for strategy, and a vision that saw beyond the immediate horizon. But let's not kid ourselves. The romantic image of the noble emperor riding into battle like a knight in shining armor needs a reality check. These wars were messy, brutal affairs. Soldiers didn't walk away with just a few bruises. They left in pieces, if at all. Yet, despite the bloodshed, Akbar's early reign was marked by a surprising openness to new ideas and people. He didn't just want to conquer land. He wanted to conquer hearts and minds, an ambition that would define his rule for decades. As Akbar settled into his role, he faced the monumental task of building a stable administration. This was no small feat in a land as diverse and divided as India. Imagine trying to manage a company where half your employees speak different languages and the other half are plotting hostile takeovers. Akbar's genius was in his ability to unify these disparate elements, laying the groundwork for what would become one of India's most celebrated reigns. In the end, Akbar wasn't just a boy who became a king. He was a visionary who saw the potential in a fractured empire and dared to dream of something greater. His story is one of courage, cunning, and charisma, with a dash of teenage audacity. As we delve deeper into his life, we'll see how this young ruler transformed the Mughal Empire into a powerhouse, all while navigating the treacherous waters of 16th century politics. So buckle up, because the saga of Akbar has only just begun. As Akbar ascended to the Mughal throne, he faced a daunting task, turning a patchwork quilt of chaos into a cohesive tapestry of power. This wasn't just a matter of barking orders and expecting obedience. No, This was 16th century India, where trying to govern was like herding cats, except the cats were armed with swords and had their own fiefdoms. Akbar needed more than just military prowess. He needed a system. Enter his revolutionary administrative reforms, a masterstroke of governance that would make even the most seasoned bureaucrat nod in approval. First up on Akbar's to-do list was the creation of a centralized governmental structure. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, oh great, another layer of red tape, let's break this down. At the time, the Mughal Empire was a sprawling beast, stretching over thousands of kilometers with a population as diverse as a modern-day music festival. Akbar's genius was in realizing that he couldn't control it all through sheer force or charisma. Instead, he needed a well-oiled machine, a bureaucracy that could function like a Swiss watch, albeit one that occasionally got clogged with the sands of Rajasthan. Akbar's administrative model was built on the Mansabdari system, a brilliant blend of military and civil administration. Picture this, a network of officials, each responsible for a specific number of troops, ranging from 10 to 10,000. These ranks, called mansabs, weren't just about prestige. They were the backbone of Akbar's empire. It was like LinkedIn, but with swords and elephants. Each mansabdar was responsible for maintaining a troop contingent, and in return, they were granted land revenues to support these forces. This wasn't just a clever way to keep the military ready. It was also a shrewd economic policy that tied the nobility's fortunes to the empire's stability. Let's talk numbers. At its peak, the Mansabdari system involved around 800 Mansabdars, each contributing to an army that could swell to over 500,000 soldiers. This wasn't just a military muscle flex. It was an economic engine. By linking revenue collection to military service, Akbar ensured that his officials had skin in the game. If the empire thrived, they thrived. If it didn't, well, let's just say there were plenty of vacancies for new Mansabdars. This was a far cry from the feudal systems in Europe, where noblemen often acted like independent contractors, more interested in their own estates than the king's wishes. But Akbar's reforms weren't just about keeping the nobles in check. He also had to ensure the economic sustainability of his empire, which brings us to his land revenue system. Akbar's finance minister, the brilliant Raja Tadar Mal, introduced a standardized system of land revenue assessment and collection, known as the Darsala or Zapti system. This was a game changer. Instead of the old haphazard method, where tax collectors often took more than their fair share, Tadar Mal's system assessed land taxes based on a 10-year average of crop yields. It was a bit like switching from guesstimates to spreadsheets. The economic impact was profound. Farmers knew exactly what was expected of them, which not only reduced corruption, but also increased agricultural productivity. More crops meant more revenue, which in turn meant a more prosperous empire. To put it in perspective, India under Akbar's rule accounted for about a quarter of the world's economy. That's right, 1 in every 4 gold coins jingling around the globe back then had its roots in Akbar's domain. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. Implementing these reforms required communication, lots of it. And here's the kicker. Akbar was illiterate. Yes, the man orchestrating one of the most sophisticated administrative systems in history couldn't read or write. But before you start picturing him as some kind of royal dunce, consider this. Akbar had a mind like a steel trap and a memory to rival any modern-day supercomputer. He surrounded himself with scholars, artists, and thinkers, his so-called 9 jewels, who acted as his eyes and ears. Still, Akbar needed a way to communicate directly with his diverse subjects. Let's just say his attempts were sometimes as awkward as a dad trying to use TikTok. He relied on a mix of translators and emissaries to bridge the language gap, and he wasn't above using a bit of humor to get his point across. There's a story, possibly apocryphal but too good to ignore, of Akbar trying to greet a group of ambassadors in their native tongue, only to accidentally insult their mothers. The ambassadors, perhaps charmed by his earnestness or fearful of losing their heads, laughed it off anyway. In reality, Akbar's illiteracy wasn't a handicap. It was a catalyst for innovation. He pioneered the use of pictograms and symbols to convey complex ideas to his officials. Imagine a giant game of Pictionary played out at a royal scale. This approach not only democratized knowledge, but also ensured that his policies were understood by even the most remote village headman. Akbar's administrative genius lay not just in the systems he built, but in the way he humanized governance. He understood that ruling wasn't just about instilling fear, but also about inspiring loyalty. By creating a merit-based system where talent was rewarded over birthright, he attracted the best and brightest to his court. This wasn't nepotism. It was a meritocracy before linked-in endorsements made it cool. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Akbar's reign, we'll see how these reforms laid the foundation for a multicultural empire that thrived on diversity and innovation. But for now, let's just say that Akbar's administrative reforms were as much about hearts and minds as they were about swords and taxes. And as we journey further into his story, we'll discover how these seeds of governance would blossom into a legacy that defied the sands of time. Akbar's visionary rule wasn't just about keeping the empire's gears well-oiled. It was also about crafting a mosaic of culture and faith that would leave an indelible mark on history. Let's dive into one of the most fascinating chapters of his reign, his cultural and religious policies. Picture 16th century India as a bustling bazaar of religions and cultures, each with its own stall of traditions and beliefs. Akbar, ever the curious sharper, wasn't content with sticking to just one brand. Instead, he decided to invent a new brew, Din-i-Ilahi. Now, Din-i-Ilahi, or the religion of God, wasn't your typical faith structure with doctrines and dogmas. It was more like a spiritual smoothie, blending elements of Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and even a dash of Jainism to create something entirely novel. Akbar wasn't exactly starting a cult, despite what some of his more skeptical critics might have thought. Rather, he was trying to foster an environment where dialogue trumped dogma, and where faith could be a bridge rather than a barrier. Of course, this wasn't a universally popular move. Imagine telling devout followers of any faith that their sacred texts were just ingredients in a larger recipe. Yeah, exactly. But Akbar, with his characteristic charm and audacity, believed that the pursuit of truth transcended any one religion. To him, Din-i-Ilahi was less about conversion and more about conversation, an avant-garde concept in an era where religious wars were the norm rather than the exception. In his court, Akbar hosted debates that would make modern-day talk shows look like kindergarten disputes. He invited scholars, theologians, and philosophers from all corners of the realm to his Ibadat Khana, or house of worship, located in Fireplace Sikri. This wasn't just a building, it was a crucible for intellectual and theological exchange. The topics ranged from the nature of the soul to the merits of vegetarianism, a subject on which Akbar reportedly had strong, if not entirely orthodox, opinions. Speaking of Fireplace Sikri, let's take a detour down its grand avenues. This wasn't just a city. It was Akbar's magnum opus, a sprawling testament to his architectural and artistic ambitions. Constructed between 1571 and 1585, this city was a kaleidoscope of red sandstone structures, intricate carvings, and expansive courtyards. Think of it as the 16th century equivalent of Silicon Valley, where innovation and creativity knew no bounds. Fireplace Sikri was more than just an imperial playground. It was a statement of power, a city designed to dazzle dignitaries and locals alike. Yet, the city wasn't just about aesthetic splendor. It was a microcosm of Akbar's syncretic vision. The architecture blended Hindu and Islamic styles, a physical manifestation of his cultural policies. The Buland Darwaza, a massive gateway standing at 54 meters high, was both a literal and metaphorical entrance to a world where cultural fusion was the norm. But here's the kicker. Despite its magnificence, Fireplace Sikri was abandoned shortly after its completion, largely due to water shortages. It's like building the world's most luxurious yacht only to find out it doesn't float. Yet, even in its short-lived glory, the city left an enduring legacy of Akbar's ambition. While Fireplace Sikri was the crown jewel of Akbar's architectural endeavors, his other patronages added to the fabric of his reign. The Akbarnama, a detailed chronicle of his life, written by his court historian Abul Fazl, wasn't just a biography. It was a multi-volume epic that captured the essence of an era. This wasn't a mere vanity project, though. The Akbarnama was meant to cement Akbar's legacy, portraying him as not just a ruler, but as a philosopher king. It was history written with a flair for the dramatic, complete with tales that might have made Akbar's life seem like a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons, of course. But let's not get carried away by the romanticism of Akbar's cultural renaissance. While his efforts at religious tolerance and cultural synthesis were groundbreaking, they were not without their limits. Din-i-Ilahi never really caught on beyond a small circle of Akbar's closest advisors. Imagine trying to get everyone at a family reunion to agree on pineapple pizza. It's just not happening. The broader Mughal populace remained rooted in their traditional faiths, viewing Din-i-Ilahi with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Moreover, Akbar's policies were a double-edged sword. His openness to other religions sometimes sparked resentment among Orthodox Muslims who viewed his syncretism as a threat to Islamic principles. Akbar was walking a tightrope between innovation and heresy, a balancing act that required all the political acumen he could muster. Yet, his efforts to promote dialogue over division laid the groundwork for an empire that, at its height, was a testament to the potential of multicultural governance. In sum, Akbar's reign was a masterclass in the art of passability. He dared to dream of a world where faith was a unifying force, not a dividing line. His cultural and religious policies were as much about exploration as they were about empire building, a reflection of a man who was as much a philosopher as he was a ruler. And while not all his experiments succeeded, they set the stage for a Mughal legacy that would endure for centuries. As we continue exploring Akbar's multifaceted rule, we'll see how his vision extended beyond the palace walls and into the very soul of the Mughal Empire. So stay tuned, because Akbar's story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as intriguing. So, we've marveled at Akbar's grand visions and audacious innovations, but now it's time to step inside the palace walls and peek into the emperor's personal life, a realm as intricate and tangled as the finest Mughal carpet. Brace yourself for a roller coaster of relationships, marriages, and alliances that make a modern soap opera look like a Sunday picnic. Akbar's personal life was a veritable tapestry woven with the threads of political strategy and personal intrigue. The man had a knack for forming alliances through marriage, which, in 16th century India, was the diplomatic equivalent of posting a selfie with a rival at a peace summit. Akbar had around 12 confirmed marriages, though some sources suggest there could have been as many as 35. But let's not get bogged down in numbers. What matters is the political genius behind these matrimonial maneuvers. Take, for example, Akbar's marriage to Maryam az-Zamani, also known as Harkabai, a Rajput princess from Amber. This union wasn't just about adding another royal to his entourage. It was a strategic masterstroke. By marrying the daughter of Raja Barmal, Akbar secured the loyalty of the powerful Rajput clans, who were as essential to his empire as Wi-Fi is to a millennial. This alliance was the foundation of a military and political collaboration that would bolster his reign for decades. Talk about marrying up in the world. Akbar wasn't just thinking about love. He was crafting alliances that would last longer than the average celebrity marriage. But it wasn't all about politics. Akbar was known for his genuine affection for his wives, particularly Maryam az-Zamani, who bore his heir, Jahangir. She wielded considerable influence in the court, becoming a trusted advisor and confidante. Her role challenges the myth that Mughal women were merely decorative, revealing instead a world where power and politics often wore a sari. Now, let's dive into the colorful world of Akbar's court, a place where intrigue and intellect danced hand in hand. Here, we meet one of the most intriguing figures in Akbar's inner circle, Birbal, the emperor's favorite court jester. Birbal, whose real name was Mahesh Das, was more than just a purveyor of jokes. He was a master of wit and wisdom. Imagine having a friend who could make you laugh while also offering sage advice on running an empire. That's Birbal for you. Their relationship was legendary, with countless tales of Birbal's cleverness becoming folklore staples. One story goes that Akbar once asked Birbal to count the crows in Agra. Without missing a beat, Birbal replied, "There are exactly 21. 523. Your Majesty, if you find more, some must have come to visit relatives. If fewer, some must have gone to visit friends." This kind of quick wit endeared him to Akbar, making Birbal an indispensable part of court life. But beyond the humor, Birbal's presence was symbolic of Akbar's openness to different perspectives. Birbal, a Hindu, held a position of significant influence, illustrating Akbar's commitment to religious and cultural inclusivity. Emperor wasn't just about creating a diverse empire. He lived it, surrounding himself with advisors of various faiths and backgrounds. Yet not everyone was a fan of this open-door policy. Akbar's court was a hotbed of rivalries and political maneuverings, where alliances could shift with the breeze, and loyalty was a commodity as valuable as gold. Think of it as a medieval version of Survivor, where the stakes were a tad higher than just getting voted off the island. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the myth that paints Akbar as a universally benevolent ruler, a sort of Santa Claus with a crown. While it's true that Akbar was a visionary, his reign wasn't without its blemishes. For starters, his campaigns of expansion were often brutal affairs. The romantic image of the noble emperor riding into battle with justice on his side belies the harsh reality of war. Conquests under Akbar's rule, like the annexation of Gujarat in 1573, were marked by fierce resistance and significant bloodshed. Moreover, while Akbar's court was a hub of cultural and religious tolerance, the broader empire was not free from conflict. His policies of religious inclusivity sometimes sparked unrest among more conservative factions. The Din-i-Ilahi, despite its noble intentions, was viewed with suspicion and even hostility by Orthodox Muslims who saw it as a dilution of Islamic principles. Akbar's vision of unity was a double-edged sword, promoting dialogue but also stirring dissent. So, was Akbar the benevolent ruler of legend, or a calculating strategist who used tolerance as a tool for control? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Akbar was a product of his time, navigating a world where power was often won through both compassion and conquest. His legacy is a complex mosaic, where the tiles of benevolence and ruthlessness sit side by side. In unraveling the myths surrounding Akbar, we're left with a portrait of a ruler who was as human as he was extraordinary. He wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a tyrant either. He was a man who dared to dream of a united empire, even as he wrestled with the realities of ruling one. As we continue on this journey through Akbar's life, we'll delve deeper into the contradictions and complexities that defined his reign. From the glittering halls of his court to the battlefields that expanded his empire, Akbar remains a figure of endless fascination, and we're just getting started. Stay tuned for more tales from the tapestry of his life, where history and myth intertwine in the most captivating ways. And so, as the sun set on the life of Akbar, the Mughal Empire stood at a crossroads. It was 1605, and the mighty emperor, who had once been a teenager with the world's weight on his shoulders, finally laid down his crown. But like any good drama, the story didn't end with a neat bow. His death left a tantalizing question hanging in the air. What now for the empire he had so meticulously crafted? Akbar's reign was like a grand tapestry, each thread woven with care, vision, and no small amount of flair. He had expanded the empire's borders, stretching them to nearly 4 million square kilometers, a feat that would make even the most ambitious board game player envious. Economically, the empire was a juggernaut, accounting for about 25% of the world's GDP, making it one of the largest and richest domains on the planet. But the true test of a ruler's legacy isn't just about the size of their empire or the wealth they accumulate. It's about what comes after them. Enter Jahangir, Akbar's son, the heir to the Mughal throne. Now, Jahangir wasn't exactly a carbon copy of his father. While Akbar was the visionary emperor with a penchant for grand reforms and cultural synthesis, Jahangir had a slightly different flair. His reign was marked by a love for the arts, a taste for opulence, and, let's be honest, a weakness for the finer things in life. Imagine moving into a mansion built by a genius architect and deciding to focus on the interior decor while ignoring the creaky foundation. That was Jahangir's approach, an emperor more interested in the aesthetics of rule than the mechanics. But before we paint Jahangir as the party prince of the Mughal Empire, let's give credit where it's due. He did manage to maintain the stability that his father had established, at least for a while. Jahangir's reign saw the continuation of Akbar's policies of religious tolerance, albeit with less fervor. The economy remained robust, buoyed by trade and the empire's vast agricultural base. However, the wheels that Akbar had set in motion were beginning to wobble, and cracks in the grand edifice were starting to show. One of the most glaring issues was the empire's administrative structure. Akbar's Mansabdari system, ingenious as it was, required constant oversight and adjustment. It was a high-maintenance machine, and Jahangir, not being the most hands-on ruler, let the cogs slip. Corruption crept in, and some Mansabdars began to operate like independent contractors, more invested in their personal gains than the empire's well-being. The once mighty bureaucratic engine started to sputter, and Jahangir's lack of administrative rigor only accelerated this decline. Moreover, while Akbar had been a master of blending cultures, Jahangir's reign was less about synthesis and more about indulgence. He was a patron of the arts, sure, but his court was more concerned with maintaining luxurious lifestyles than with the innovative spirit that had characterized his father's rule. Jahangir's addiction to opium and alcohol didn't help matters, often clouding his judgment and leaving the day-to-day running of the empire to his wife, Nur Jahan. Talk about a power couple. Nur Jahan was a formidable force, but even she couldn't fully compensate for Jahangir's lack of focus. Despite these challenges, Jahangir's rule wasn't without its achievements. His patronage of the arts led to a flourishing of Mughal painting, and his love for nature resulted in detailed memoirs that offer fascinating insights into the period's fauna and flora. But these contributions, while culturally significant, couldn't mask the underlying issues of governance and stability. So, how did Akbar's legacy fare in the long run? Well, the empire he built outlasted him by a good century and a half, which is no small feat. Yet, the seeds of its eventual decline were sown during Jahangir's reign. The Mughals maintained their grip on power through a mix of military might and political acumen, but the cracks in the foundation grew with each successive ruler. Fast forward to today, and Akbar is often remembered as the ideal ruler, a sort of South Asian King Arthur, minus the Knights of the Round Table. In modern India, his reign is romanticized as a golden age of cultural fusion and religious tolerance. Bollywood films and history books have painted him as a benevolent, almost mythical figure, a portrayal that both fascinates and frustrates historians. The reality is far more nuanced. While Akbar was indeed a visionary and a reformer, his reign was also marked by the harsh realities of imperial ambition and expansion. In the end, Akbar's legacy is a testament to the complexity of historical figures. He was a man who dreamed big and had the audacity to turn those dreams into reality. Yet he was also a product of his time, with all the flaws and contradictions that come with it. His impact on the Mughal Empire and Indian history is undeniable, but how much of his vision truly survived after him is a question that's still debated today. As the curtain falls on our exploration of Akbar's life and legacy, we're left with a portrait of a ruler who was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. He left behind an empire that was a marvel of its age, a testament to the power of vision and the importance of leadership. Yet, like all empires, it was ultimately subject to the tides of history, a reminder that even the greatest achievements are but a chapter in the ever-unfolding story of humanity. Vasco Núñez de Balboa was not your average early 16th century Spaniard. He had this uncanny knack for finding himself in situations that seemed better suited to a slapstick comedy than the pages of a history book. Born sometime around 1475 in Lleras de los Caballeros, which sounds fancy, but is really just a small town in Extremadura, Spain, Balboa came into a world of exploration and chaos. The age of exploration was like the Wild West of oceanic adventure, and Spain was at the heart of it, throwing money and ships at anything that promised gold, glory, or the faintest whiff of a new trade route. Now, Balboa wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His family had noble blood, but not much to show for it, more of a rusty dagger kind of lineage. So, like many young men of his time, he saw the New World as his golden ticket, or at least a way to avoid starving. Cue the scene in 1500, when Balboa, at the ripe old age of 25, embarked on his first expedition to the Americas with Rodrigo de Bastidas. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The real comedy of errors begins a few years later on the island of Hispaniola. In Hispaniola, Balboa tried his hand at farming, which sounds pastoral and peaceful, doesn't it? In reality, it was more of an exercise in futility. Picture him, a would-be conquistador, more used to swinging swords than wielding hoes, attempting to cultivate land that stubbornly refused to cooperate. The venture flopped like a fish out of water, leaving Balboa in debt, and with little more than a sunburn and a newfound appreciation for the hardiness of local weeds. Faced with creditors knocking on his door, Balboa did what any self-respecting, disgraced farmer turned adventurer would do. He hid in a barrel. Yes, you heard that right. In 1510, Balboa literally barreled his way into the next chapter of his life, stowing away on a ship bound for San Sebastián de Urubá, a fledgling settlement on the mainland of South America. Talk about rolling with the punches. The captain of the ship, Martin Fernandez de Enciso, was understandably less than thrilled to discover Balboa once they were well out to sea. But Balboa, ever the charmer, managed to talk his way into staying aboard, proving that a silver tongue can sometimes be more valuable than a pocket full of coins. The allure of the New World was undeniable, and Balboa wasn't the only one drawn by the siren's call. Europe, in the early 1500, was a chaotic mess of ambition and exploration, driven by the triple temptations of gold, guard, and glory. Spain, in particular, was on a mission to outdo Portugal in discovering new lands and wealth, with the Spanish crown sponsoring numerous expeditions. These ventures promised untold riches, but they also involved untold risks, like disease, hostile encounters, and the ever-present threat of mutiny. Balboa's arrival in San Sebastián de Urubá was far from glamorous. The colony was a disaster zone, plagued by hostile natives, and a climate that seemed hell-bent on making life as miserable as possible. Enciso's leadership was about as effective as a chocolate teapot, and the situation quickly devolved into chaos. Balboa, seeing an opportunity amidst the disorder, stepped up and suggested moving the settlement to a more hospitable location. His suggestion, Darien, on the Isthmus of Panama, a land rumored to be rich in gold and less likely to kill its inhabitants with tropical diseases. The journey to Darien was a grueling trek through dense jungles and swamps, the kind of place where everything either stings, bites, or wants to eat you. The conquistadors, clad in heavy armor, tramped through the jungle like a herd of lost tin men, swatting at mosquitoes and cursing under their breath. Balboa, however, was nothing if not persistent. With a motley crew of around 190 men, he hacked his way through the jungle, and in September 1510, they founded the settlement of Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien, the first stable Spanish settlement on the mainland of the Americas. It's here that the absurdity of conquistador ambitions truly shines. These men, far from home, in an unknown land, were driven by tales of gold that were often more myth than reality. The rumors of a wealthy indigenous empire somewhere beyond the mountains fueled their desires and delusions. They believed they were destined to find treasures that would make them richer than their wildest dreams, yet more often than not, they found only hardship and hunger. Balboa's early ventures into Darien were marked by a blend of boldness and bluster. He managed to establish relatively good relations with some of the local tribes, which was no small feat given the conquistadors' usual approach was more conquer and plunder than meet and greet. Balboa's charm and diplomacy earned him alliances that would prove crucial in his later explorations, but they also highlight the absurdity of the conquistadors' approach. Seeking to rule lands and peoples they barely understood with a mix of bravado and blind faith. Vasco Núñez de Balboa's story is one of contradictions. He was a man who sought glory, but often found himself knee-deep in mud and misery. His ambitious spirit was matched only by the absurdity of his circumstances, and yet he played a pivotal role in the early exploration of the Americas. As we follow his journey through the jungle, we'll see how Balboa's boldness led him to one of the most significant discoveries of the age. But for now, let's leave him hacking his way through the dense foliage of Darien, dreaming of golden empires, and perhaps regretting just a little that he ever set foot on that ship. Balboa, machete in hand, was elbow-deep in the jungle, dreaming of gold and maybe a hammock. But let's not get too comfortable in this tropical paradise. That's where the story gets messy. You see, Balboa's jaunt through Darien wasn't just about dodging snakes and mosquitoes. It was a masterclass in networking 16th century style. And by networking, I mean the kind where you might accidentally start a war if you say the wrong thing, or even if you say the right thing but in the wrong way. Let's dive into Balboa's diplomatic escapades, a real life linked in saga, where your connections could mean the difference between finding gold or ending up as dinner. Balboa was savvy enough to realize that the indigenous peoples of the region weren't just obstacles on his path to glory. They were potential allies, but forging alliances was trickier than trying to explain Wi-Fi to your grandparents. Balboa had to navigate a minefield of tribal politics, and his success largely depended on his ability to charm, cajole, and occasionally coerce his way into the good graces of local leaders. Take, for instance, his relationship with the cacique, or chief, Camarga. When Balboa first encountered Camarga's people, it was less a meeting of minds and more a clash of cultures. But Balboa, ever the opportunist, saw the value in Camarga's friendship. Camarga's settlement was not only strategically located, but also rich in resources, real estate worth fighting over in the competitive world of conquistador realpolitik. So, Balboa turned on the charm, which in the 1500 meant a mix of flattery, trade, and when necessary, the subtle hint of a sword. It was during a feast hosted by Camarga that the indigenous leader decided to showcase his wealth, presenting Balboa with 4,000 pesos worth of gold, a small fortune that had Balboa's men salivating like kids in a candy store. However, what followed was a scene that could have been straight out of a reality TV show. Balboa's men, in their greed, began squabbling over the gold, prompting Camarga's son to deliver what can only be described as a historical mic drop. "If you're so hungry for gold," he said, "why don't you go to the other side where my father's enemy, the great cacique Tubanamar, has even more?" And just like that, the legend of the Pacific Ocean was dangled before Balboa like a carrot on a stick. This revelation set Balboa's ambitions ablaze, but it also highlighted the precarious nature of his alliances. Camarga's son's taunt wasn't just an invitation. It was a challenge, a call to arms that promised both riches and risks. Balboa, however, was nothing if not audacious. With the lure of the unknown Pacific beckoning, he knew he needed the support of more than just Camarga's tribe. He needed to be a maestro of diplomacy, striking deals with a patchwork of tribes, each with its own interests and grievances. Yet for every alliance Balboa forged, there was a conflict brewing. Not every tribe was keen on playing nice with the Spaniards. Enter the cacique Cara, another prominent leader who was initially less than thrilled about sharing his territory with these strange, armor-clad intruders. Balboa, recognizing the need to win over Cara, orchestrated a diplomatic coup of sorts. He not only managed to broker a peace, but also sealed the deal by taking Cara's daughter as his mistress. Because nothing says peace treaty like a little familial bonding, right? But let's not romanticize Balboa's tactics. While his diplomatic efforts were sometimes successful, they often involved the kind of strong-arming that would make a modern-day corporate raider blush. Balboa's strategy was as much about imposing Spanish superiority as it was about negotiation. His alliances were frequently maintained by a delicate balance of power, one that could tip into violence at the drop of a helmet. Balboa's jungle jaunts were logistical nightmares worthy of their own adventure saga. Imagine leading a ragtag group of 190 men, each armed with rusty swords and an even rustier sense of direction, through a labyrinth of swamps and mountains. Supply lines were non-existent, and the terrain was as unforgiving as a judge on a bad day. Yet Balboa, with a mix of charisma and coercion, managed to keep his crew in line, a feat akin to herding cats through a thunderstorm. His leadership style was a blend of inspiration and intimidation. Balboa knew when to rally his men with promises of riches and when to remind them of the sharpness of his sword. It was a tightrope walk, balancing motivation with the ever-present threat of mutiny. After all, in the age of exploration, a leader was only as secure as his ability to deliver on the promise of treasure, or at least avoid getting skewered by his own men. Balboa's ability to navigate both the jungle and the labyrinthine politics of the indigenous peoples was no small feat. He was a man of contradictions, driven by dreams of gold, but often finding himself mired in the muck of reality. His alliances were as tenuous as his claims to power, reliant on the goodwill of people who had every reason to mistrust him. And yet, through a combination of luck, charm, and sheer determination, Balboa carved a path through the chaos, setting the stage for one of the most significant discoveries of the age. As Balboa hacked his way through the jungle, he wasn't just clearing a physical path, he was forging a narrative, one that would echo through history as both a tale of triumph and a cautionary saga of ambition unchained. His story is a reminder of the thin line between heroism and hubris, a dance of diplomacy and dominance played out on a stage as vast and unpredictable as the New World itself. And so, Balboa continued his journey, a man driven by dreams of empire and the siren call of the sea. His path was fraught with danger, but the prize at the end, a glimpse of the mighty Pacific, was worth every risk. But that's a tale for another day, as Balboa's journey through the jungle and into the annals of history was far from over. Stay tuned for more, as the intrepid conquistador edges ever closer to his destiny, one machete swing at a time. As Balboa hacked his way through the jungle, he wasn't just clearing a physical path. He was forging a narrative, one that would echo through history as both a tale of triumph and a cautionary saga of ambition unchained. His story is a reminder of the thin line between heroism and hubris, a dance of diplomacy and dominance played out on a stage as vast and unpredictable as the New World itself. Now, let's fast forward to September 1513, when Balboa and his ragtag crew of 190 men finally took the plunge into one of history's most grueling treks. The Isthmus of Panama lay before them, a narrow strip of land that seemed to have been designed by a particularly sadistic topographer. We're talking about 60 miles of dense jungle, swamps that could swallow a manhole, and mountains so steep they seemed to laugh in the face of gravity. Forget about scenic hikes. This was more like an endless obstacle course from a nightmare. The journey was a wager against nature itself. Balboa's men, decked out in armor that made them look like medieval suitcases, faced the tropics' greatest hits: swarms of mosquitoes, venomous snakes, and the kind of humidity that could make even a cactus sweat. On average, they trudged about 2 to 3 miles a day, which sounds like a gentle stroll until you factor in the mud, the machetes, and the ever-present threat of dysentery. And speaking of unpleasant realities, let's not overlook the economic side of things. The expedition wasn't running on goodwill alone. Balboa had to keep his men fed, armed, and motivated. No easy feat when your budget is tighter than a miser's purse strings. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the miserable conditions, Balboa's expedition was surprisingly well supplied for its time. They had enough food to sustain them, thanks to alliances with local tribes, which provided maize and other staples. Nevertheless, maintaining even this basic level of support was like juggling flaming swords. Any misstep in diplomacy could spell disaster. Balboa's network of indigenous allies was less a safety net and more a high wire, with every negotiation a balancing act between mutual benefit and mutual suspicion. Let's tackle the myth-making head-on, shall we? There's this grand image of Balboa heroically discovering the Pacific, as if it had been hiding behind a particularly large bush. The truth, however, is less like a fairy tale and more like a grunge album. Indigenous peoples had known about the Pacific long before Balboa decided to take a peek. In fact, they were the ones who tipped him off in the first place. So, while Balboa was the first European to lay eyes on the ocean, calling it a discovery is a bit like Columbus stumbling upon America and claiming he found India. Still, what Balboa achieved was no small feat. On September 25, 1513, after 25 days of slogging through nature's worst, Balboa reached the summit of a hill in what is now Panama. From there, he gazed upon the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Imagine the moment. A sweaty, exhausted conquistador, armor clanking, standing atop a hill, gazing out at the endless blue. It was a sight that must have seemed like both a reward and a taunt. Balboa, ever the showman, claimed the ocean for Spain, sword in hand, in a ceremony that was more about pomp than practicality. After all, how do you claim an ocean with a sword? It's like trying to carve a steak with a spoon. This moment, etched in history, wasn't just about personal glory. It was a pivotal point in the European colonial agenda. The Pacific Ocean represented new trade routes, untapped resources, and a whole new arena for imperial rivalry. For Spain, it was like opening a door to a room full of gold. Balboa's achievement, however, was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it cemented his place in the annals of exploration. On the other, it set the stage for the brutal conquest and exploitation that would follow. The discovery of the Pacific was a prelude to the tidal wave of colonization that would sweep across the Americas, leaving a legacy of both progress and plunder. Let's not forget the human cost of this voyage. Balboa's men endured unimaginable hardships, all for the fleeting promise of wealth and fame. The trek across the isthmus claimed lives, with tropical diseases picking off soldiers like a sniper in a jungle. And yet, despite the odds, Balboa's charisma and leadership kept his crew going. He was a master at rallying spirits, promising riches just over the next hill, a technique familiar to anyone who's ever been on a road trip with a stubborn optimist. So, what did it all cost? In tangible terms, the trek to the Pacific was an exercise in resource management. Balboa's expedition stretched the limits of logistics, with every step forward a gamble with supplies and sanity. The journey was not just a test of endurance, but a reflection of the broader European hunger for dominance. It was a microcosm of the age of exploration, driven by dreams, fueled by ambition, and fraught with peril. As we leave Balboa standing on his hill, sword raised to the heavens, it's worth pondering the legacy of such discoveries. They were milestones of human achievement, certainly. They were also harbingers of the exploitation and conquest that would reshape continents. Balboa's gaze across the Pacific was a look into the future, a future of new horizons and new horrors. With the Pacific now in his sights, Balboa's story isn't quite done. The path forward would be fraught with as much political intrigue as jungle danger, and his next steps would determine not only his fate, but also the fate of the burgeoning Spanish Empire in the New World. So, stay tuned for more as our intrepid explorer continues his journey, navigating the treacherous waters of both the jungle and the court, one step closer to the destiny that awaits him. As Balboa stood atop that hill, sword aloft in theatrical fashion, he was blissfully unaware that he was about to swap the steamy jungles of Panama for a whole new kind of wilderness, Spanish colonial politics. Now, if you thought the jungle was a tricky place to navigate, you clearly haven't met Pedrerias de Villa, the man sent by Spain to govern the region. Pedrerias landed in Darien in 1514, and let me tell you, this guy brought a flair for drama that could rival any reality TV villain. With the royal seal in one hand and a dagger in the other, Pedrerias was tasked with bringing order to the chaos. However, his idea of order was more about consolidating power than balancing ledgers. Balboa, fresh from his Pacific triumph, returned to find his own story taking a Shakespearean turn. The new governor wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Pedrerias saw Balboa not as a hero, but as a threat to his authority, a rival with a dangerous knack for winning loyalty. So began a political game as complex as chess, but with the stakes and the players' heads on the line. Balboa, who was once the darling of Darien, suddenly found himself in a tropical version of musical chairs, where the music was made by the clinking of swords and the rustling of bureaucratic scrolls. Let's talk about Pedrerias for a moment. This guy was the walking embodiment of paranoia. Balboa's success painted a target on his back, a shining bullseye for Pedrerias' insecurities, and in a twist of fate worthy of an epic poem, Pedrerias was married to Balboa's betrothed. That's right, folks. Balboa was engaged to Maria de Peñalosa, Pedrerias' daughter, a union arranged to cement alliances. Imagine the family dinners. Pass the potatoes. And by the way, I'm plotting your downfall. The balancing act of keeping a future father-in-law from metaphorically, and perhaps literally, stabbing you in the back is something even the most seasoned diplomats would find challenging. Here's where the comedy of errors really kicks in. Balboa, ever the optimist, decided the best way to secure his legacy would be to play nice with Pedrerias. Cue the awkward alliance. Balboa was appointed as the interim governor of the newly established colony of Akbar, an administrative position that was less about ruling and more about being a sitting duck. But Balboa had a plan, and it involved returning to his one true love, adventure. He began organizing an expedition to explore and conquer the fabled lands south of the Pacific, rumored to be dripping with gold like a king's treasury. But first, he had to deal with the red tape of colonial administration, which was about as efficient as a snail on a treadmill. Colonial administration at the time was a bureaucratic nightmare, and Balboa was knee-deep in it. Imagine trying to get a permit to construct ships for your exploration when every piece of paper needed was guarded by officials who treated ink like it was liquid gold. Balboa had to navigate more red tape than a Christmas gift, with Pedrerias holding the scissors. The governor was less than enthusiastic about Balboa's plans, seeing them as a potential power grab. Yet, despite the governor's constant undermining, Balboa managed to build ships on the Pacific coast, a feat akin to assembling IKEA furniture without the instructions or the little Allen wrench. Just as Balboa's ships were nearing completion, Pedrerias played his ace. He called Balboa back to Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien under the pretense of a friendly chat, a move as subtle as a bull in a china shop. Balboa, perhaps sensing the trap, but with limited options, complied. Upon his return, he was arrested on charges of treason and corruption, accusations as flimsy as a pirate's promise. The trial was a farce, a kangaroo court conducted by Pedreria's cronies, with the verdict decided before Balboa even entered the room. It was the kind of legal proceeding where evidence was optional, and the only witnesses were those who conveniently forgot Balboa's accomplishments. The trial ended swiftly, with Balboa sentenced to death. In January 1519, he was executed by beheading, a grim end for a man who had dared to dream of empire. The execution was public, a spectacle designed to send a message. Ambition, unchecked, was a dangerous game. It was a harsh reminder that in the cutthroat world of colonial politics, the line between hero and traitor was as thin as a conquistador's sword. Balboa's story, much like his life, was a blend of triumph and tragedy, ambition and hubris. What's fascinating here is how Balboa's legacy was shaped by those very forces he sought to master. The politics of the time were a swirling vortex of ambition and paranoia, where alliances were as stable as a house of cards. Balboa's life was a testament to the dangers of standing out in a world that valued conformity. His dreams of exploration and wealth were shared by many, but his willingness to act on them set him apart, and ultimately led to his downfall. Balboa's execution might have been the end of his story, but it was just a chapter in the greater saga of Spanish exploration. His discoveries opened the door to the Pacific, sparking a wave of expeditions that would follow in his footsteps. The Spanish crown, ever hungry for wealth and empire, continued to push deeper into the Americas, driven by the same dreams that had propelled Balboa. The political machinations in Darien are a microcosm of colonial expansion itself, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of power. Balboa's relationship with Pedrerias was emblematic of the fragile alliances that underpinned Spanish rule in the New World. The conquistadors were driven by dreams of glory, but their reality was often shaped by the whims of those who wielded power. In the end, Balboa's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the human cost of empire building. His journey from the jungles of Darien to the gallows was marked by ambition and betrayal, triumph and tragedy. It's a story that resonates even today, a reflection of the timeless dance of power and ambition that continues to shape our world. As we leave Balboa behind, it's worth reflecting on the legacy of explorers like him. Their voyages were fueled by dreams of wealth and glory, but they also set the stage for centuries of conquest and colonization. The age of exploration was a time of great discovery, but it was also a time of great loss, a period that saw the collision of worlds and the reshaping of continents. Balboa's life was a testament to the power of dreams and the dangers of ambition. His story is a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experience, a narrative shaped by the choices and actions of those who dared to dream big. As we prepare to dive into the final chapter of Balboa's legacy, let's not forget the lessons of his life and the impact of his discoveries on the world we know today. Stay tuned for the conclusion, where we'll explore the aftermath of Balboa's death and the continuing saga of Spanish exploration in the New World. Balboa's legacy, then, is one balanced precariously between grand adventure and grim reality, an explorer who dared to reach for the stars, only to be brought down by the very forces that propelled him upward. His story is a stark reminder that the line between celebrated hero and fallen outcast is as fine as the edge of a conquistador's sword. The tale of Vasco Núñez de Balboa isn't just about a man who saw an ocean. It's about the tumultuous waves of ambition and power that crashed around him, shaping the future in ways he could never have foreseen. Let's zoom out from Balboa's personal saga and take a look at the broader canvas of history, the bigger picture that makes his journey more than just a footnote in the annals of exploration. Balboa's discovery of the Pacific Ocean was a game-changer, a watershed moment that opened new routes for trade and expansion. It was like unlocking a door to a treasure vault, except this vault was a vast ocean teeming with possibilities. Spain, having already tasted the sweet nectar of New World riches, was eager to exploit this new frontier. The promise of the Pacific was not just about adventure, it was about economics, pure and simple. The Spanish crown saw dollar signs, or rather, peso symbols, dancing before their eyes, dreaming of the potential wealth that could flow from trading alliances and new colonies. Yet, for all its promise, the Pacific was also a Pandora's box. Balboa's discovery paved the way for subsequent expeditions, but these ventures were often marked by the same brutality that had characterized the conquest of the Americas. The indigenous populations, who had thrived on these lands for centuries, suddenly found themselves caught in the crosshairs of European expansion. The arrival of the Spanish was less a meeting of cultures and more a clash of civilizations, where the winners wrote the history books and the losers were often erased from the narrative. The Spanish colonization efforts in the Pacific region led to the exploitation and decimation of indigenous communities, a tragic legacy that is often glossed over in the romanticized tales of exploration. Balboa's exploits were a prelude to this darker chapter. His interactions with native tribes, while occasionally diplomatic, were also marked by coercion and conquest. These were not encounters of equals, they were power plays, with the Spaniards wielding superior weapons and a sense of entitlement. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific coast, much like those in the Caribbean and Central America, faced the twin threats of disease and displacement. The arrival of Europeans brought with it not only guns and steel, but also smallpox and influenza, diseases to which the native populations had no immunity. The impact was devastating, reducing once thriving communities to shadows of their former selves. It's important to recognize that while Balboa's name is etched into history as a pioneering explorer, the reality of his legacy is far more complex. His journeys were not just voyages of discovery, they were also missions of domination. The age of exploration, for all its tales of heroism and adventure, was also an era of exploitation and oppression. The conquistadors, Balboa included, were driven by dreams of wealth and empire, but their actions set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter the course of history for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. As we reflect on Balboa's life and legacy, it's worth asking how we remember figures like him. History has a tendency to lionize its heroes, to cast them in a golden light that sometimes obscures the darker corners of their stories. Balboa is often celebrated as a trailblazer, a man who dared to cross the unknown, and in doing so, expanded the horizons of European knowledge. But the reality is that his journey was fraught with moral ambiguity, a testament to the complex interplay between ambition and ethics. The romanticized narrative of Balboa paints him as a dashing adventurer, a man who conquered the jungle and gazed upon the mighty Pacific. Yet, the unvarnished truth reveals a figure caught in the tides of history, driven by the same desires that have fueled human conflict for centuries, the pursuit of power, wealth, and immortality. It's a reminder that the stories we tell about our past are as much about who we are as they are about who we were. Balboa's downfall is a cautionary tale, emblematic of the precarious nature of power and the fleeting glory of conquest. His execution, orchestrated by political rivals, underscores the brutal realities of colonial politics, where alliances were as fragile as the promises they were built upon. The world Balboa helped to shape was one of opportunity and peril, a world where the pursuit of glory often led to ruin. In the grand tapestry of history, Balboa's story is a thread woven with ambition and audacity, triumph and tragedy. His life was a testament to the human spirit's relentless drive to explore the unknown, but also a sobering reminder of the costs of such endeavors. As we look back on his legacy, let's not forget the lessons of his journey, the complex interplay of dreams and reality, ambition and morality, and the enduring impact of our actions on the world around us. So, as we close the book on Balboa's tale, let's take a moment to ponder the broader significance of his life and legacy. The age of exploration was a time of great change, a period that reshaped the world in profound ways. Balboa's discovery of the Pacific was a milestone in this era, but it was also a turning point that set the stage for centuries of colonial expansion and exploitation. In remembering Balboa, let's strive for a balanced view, one that acknowledges both the romance of exploration and the realities of conquest. And there you have it, folks, the story of Vasco Núñez de Balboa, a man whose life was as tumultuous as the seas he crossed, a man who reached for the stars and found himself caught in the storm. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of dreams and the complex tapestry of history, a story that continues to resonate in our world today. In the ancient world of power plays and territorial chess, the Lydian kingdom was that cheeky underdog who figured out how to win big before most knew the game had even started. Nestled snugly in what we now call Turkey, Lydia had some serious geographical bragging rights. We're talking about prime real estate, fertile lands, and strategic trade routes that would make any ancient king drool. And drool they did. This land was sandwiched between the Aegean Sea to the west and the Anatolian Plateau to the east, a perfect spot for catching all the caravans rolling in with exotic goods and ideas. Now let's talk about the guy who took this kingdom from a regional player to a major powerhouse, Gyges. Around 680 BCE, this dude ascended to the throne with more than just a crown in mind. Gyges was ambitious, the kind of ambitious that says, why stop at one throne when you can have many? His reign kicked off a series of military campaigns that expanded Lydia's borders faster than you can say imperial overreach. Before Gyges, Lydia was like your neighborhood bakery. Nice, local, but not exactly making waves beyond the village. Post-Gyges, Lydia was that bakery that got a feature on a foodie show and suddenly had a line around the block. Gyges didn't just rely on brute force to make a name for Lydia. No, he was more of a strategic mastermind, the kind who'd play a game of risk and somehow walk away with territories you didn't even know were on the board. His military conquests were about as subtle as a rock concert, but they were effective. He took on neighboring kingdoms with a swagger that suggested he had more than just a few tricks up his royal sleeve. The kingdom of Phrygia, for instance, found itself on the losing side of a showdown with Gyges, and it wasn't long before Lydia was flexing its muscles as a regional superpower. But it wasn't all swords and spears. Gyges had another ace up his sleeve, and it was shiny, coinage. Yep, Lydia is credited with minting the first coins in history. This wasn't just a financial revolution, it was a full-blown economic game-changer. Before coins, trading was a barter system, free-for-all, where you might end up swapping a goat for a sack of grain and hoping you didn't get shortchanged. Coins brought standardization, making trade smoother than a well-oiled chariot. Lydia's coins were made from electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, and they came with a stamp that screamed, official Lydian business. Suddenly, the Lydians weren't just wealthy, they were setting the tone for economic practices across the region. With coinage, trade became more efficient, and Lydia's wealth skyrocketed faster than a chariot on a downhill race. It was as if the kingdom had discovered the ancient world's version of the stock market, and they were cashing in big time. This newfound wealth didn't just pad the royal coffers, it funded further military campaigns and solidified Lydia's position on the geopolitical stage. Gyges, with his coins and campaigns, turned Lydia into a beacon of prosperity. And let's face it, in a world where might often made right, having a bulging treasury was as good as having a few extra battalions. People started to take notice, not just the neighbors, but the big kids on the block, like the Assyrians and the Greeks. Lydia was no longer just a blip on the map. It was a player in the grand Game of Thrones that was the ancient Near East. Gyges even managed to forge alliances with the Greeks, sending gifts to Delphi, home of the famous oracle. This wasn't just a PR move. It was a clever way to ensure that the guards, or at least their earthly spokespeople, were on Lydia's side. Historians like Herodotus couldn't resist the allure of Gyges' story. He spun tales about the Lydian king that were as much about myth as they were about history. According to Herodotus, Gyges seized the throne after a scandalous affair involving the previous king's wife. Whether true or not, it's a tale that's hard to resist. A bit of royal drama that adds a splash of color to the dusty annals of history. So there you have it, a kingdom that went from obscurity to opulence thanks to a king with a knack for strategy and a revolutionary approach to economics. Lydia's geographical advantages, combined with Gyge's military prowess and the introduction of coinage, set the stage for a historical ascent that was as dazzling as it was strategic. And all this, long before most kingdoms had even figured out that you could put a face on a coin and call it money. The Lydians cracked the code, and in doing so, they paved the way for the economic systems that would shape the ancient world and beyond. Now, if Gyges was Lydia's scrappy startup founder, then Croesus was its IPO rock star, draped in gold chains and lighting cigars with ancient banknotes. He didn't just inherit a kingdom, he inherited a treasure chest so bountiful it practically jingled with every step he took. Croesus, reigning from 595 to 546 BCE, didn't just become a proverb for wealth. He became the living embodiment of the Mede's touch, except his touch was more about gold mines than mythical curses. And let's not kid ourselves. Being one of the wealthiest individuals in history wasn't just about lounging in luxury. It was about strategic acumen and a splash of audacity. First up, the gold mines. Croesus' dominion over the Pactalis River was akin to owning your personal ATM, one that dispensed precious metals instead of paper currency. Legend has it that King Midas himself washed his golden touch away in these waters, leaving behind sands that gleamed with the promise of prosperity. The reality, these gold deposits were as real as the envy they sparked across the ancient world. The wealth from these mines funded not just palatial indulgence, but also the expansion of Lydia's influence through trade and diplomacy. Croesus' knack for turning natural resources into geopolitical leverage was like playing economic chess, while everyone else was fiddling with checkers. But Croesus didn't just rely on Mother Nature's generosity. The man knew a thing or two about trade. Lydia was the crossroads of the ancient trade routes, a bustling hub where east met west, and the goods were as diverse as the travelers. Spices from India, silks from China, and olive oil from Greece passed through Lydian markets, each transaction further padding Croesus' already bulging coffers. By standardizing weights and measures, he ensured that Lydia wasn't just a middleman, but a dominant player in the ancient economy. He was the Jeff Bezos of his time, minus the space rockets and online shopping carts. Now, you might imagine Croesus sitting pretty counting coins like Scrooge McDuck, but in reality, his wealth was a double-edged sword. Sure, it bought him influence and alliances, but it also painted a big, gold-plated target on his back. Neighboring empires, especially the Persians under Cyrus the Great, saw Lydia's wealth as too tempting to ignore. And here's where things take a turn for the legendary, or the cautionary tale, depending on your perspective. Enter the Oracle of Delphi, that ancient heartline to the divine. Croesus, like many rulers of his time, was no stranger to consulting oracles for guidance. The story goes that he sent lavish gifts to the oracle, hoping for some divine assurance about his upcoming campaign against Persia. The oracle's cryptic response: "If you cross the Harleys, a great empire will fall." Spoiler alert, it wasn't the empire Croesus had in mind. The appeal of this myth is undeniable. Who doesn't love a good tale of hubris and downfall? But the reality is a tad more sobering. The oracle's ambiguous prophecies were as much about politics as they were about divine insight. Croesus' misinterpretation was less about fate and more about the peril of overconfidence. In the end, Croesus' campaign against Cyrus didn't just end in military defeat. It marked the end of Lydia's independence. The irony: the very wealth that had built Croesus' empire became its undoing. Cyrus captured Sardes, Lydia's capital, in 546 BCE, and with it went the fortunes of a kingdom that had dazzled the ancient world. Croesus himself was spared, reportedly becoming an advisor to Cyrus, a twist that suggests even in defeat, his strategic mind was too valuable to waste. And what do we make of Croesus and his gilded legacy? His reign was a testament to the power and peril of wealth, an ancient lesson in the double-edged nature of prosperity. We remember him as the king whose riches turned into a cautionary proverb, whose ambition was as vast as his kingdom's coffers, and whose story reminds us that even the most golden of empires can crumble if not tempered with foresight and humility. As we continue our journey through Lydia's history, remember, gold may glitter, but it's not always the key to enduring greatness. So, with Croesus' gilded empire now tucked under Persian rule, you might think Lydia would fade into the background like a washed-up rock star. But Lydia had more than just wealth going for it. This was a kingdom that thrived not just on gold, but on cultural ingenuity and an uncanny knack for playing the socio-political game. Let's dive into the tapestry of Lydia's socio-political dynamics, where the threads are woven with diplomacy, art, and a pinch of drama. First, let's talk neighbors. When the mighty Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great rolled into town, Lydia didn't just curl up and disappear. Instead, it adapted, morphing into a vital cog within the sprawling Persian machine. This wasn't just survival. This was strategic genius. Lydia became a satrapy, a province in the Persian Empire, which sounds about as exciting as being the third cousin at a royal wedding. But wait, there's more. This provincial status came with perks. Lydia got to maintain a degree of autonomy, a move that was as much about Persian pragmatism as it was about Lydian diplomacy. The Persians weren't stupid. They knew a content province was far less likely to rebel. And let's not forget the Greeks. Lydia had a complex relationship with these seafaring philosophers. The two cultures were like that odd couple at a dinner party, different in many ways, yet somehow fascinatingly complementary. Greek cities along the coast, like Ephesus and Miletus, were close enough to Lydia that they traded more than just goods. They exchanged ideas. This cultural cross-pollination led to some of the most groundbreaking innovations of the time. Think of it as an ancient TED talk circuit, where everyone was swapping stories, trading secrets, and showing off their latest gadgets. Lydia's influence on Greek culture was like a backstage pass to a rock concert, an experience that left a lasting impression. For instance, the Lydians were pioneers in the arts, particularly in music. The Greek historian Herodotus, our ancient gossip columnist, credits the Lydians with inventing the aulos, a double-reed instrument that was a staple in Greek music. It's like Lydia handed over the saxophone to a jazz band, and the Greeks ran with it, creating symphonies that would echo through the ages. Architecture, too, was a Lydian foray. They weren't just stacking stones willy-nilly, they were creating masterpieces. The city of Sardis, Lydia's capital, was a marvel of urban planning and aesthetic appeal. Temples, palaces, and public spaces were constructed with a flair that whispered of both opulence and sophistication. The Lydians knew that beauty wasn't just skin deep. It was a tool of political power and social cohesion. In a world where might often made right, a well-crafted temple or a grand public square could be as persuasive as an army. Now, let's bust a few myths. Lydia is often painted with a brush of romantic tragedy, a kingdom swept away by the tides of history, a golden age ended by the cold steel of Persian conquest. But the reality is more nuanced. The Lydians were not passive players in their fate. They were active participants in the geopolitical game, negotiating their place in the world with both cunning and creativity. Their legacy wasn't just a cautionary tale about wealth and power. It was a testament to resilience and adaptability. And speaking of legacy, Lydia's influence on the monetary systems of the time was like the Beatles on modern music, ubiquitous and transformative. The Lydian innovation of coinage didn't just stay within its borders. It spread like wildfire, shaping economies from Greece to India. Coins became the lingua franca of trade, a universal language that spoke of value and trust. Lydia's coins were like the first iPhones. Everyone wanted one, and those little stamped pieces of electrum became the gold standard, quite literally. So why does any of this matter? Because Lydia was more than just a kingdom that got swallowed up by an empire. It was a crucible of innovation, a cultural melting pot that mixed different peoples, ideas, and technologies to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Lydia didn't just influence its neighbors, it reshaped entire civilizations. The Greeks, those pioneers of philosophy and democracy, borrowed more than a few pages from the Lydian playbook. The Persians, masters of administration and empire building, found in Lydia a model of how to incorporate rich, diverse cultures into a cohesive whole. In the grand tapestry of history, Lydia was no mere footnote. It was a catalyst for change, a kingdom whose echoes can still be heard in the rhythms of modern life. As we continue this journey through Lydia's storied past, remember, history is not just a series of events. It's a dance of ideas, a symphony of human endeavor and ambition. And Lydia, it was the maestro conducting an orchestra that played on long after the last Lydian king had fallen. Stay tuned, because the story isn't over yet. There's more to unravel, more myths to bust, and more truths to uncover. Speaking of orchestras and maestros, it's time to turn the spotlight on Lydia's grand finale, a crescendo that both dazzles and dismays. As we tiptoe closer to Lydia's curtain call, let's dive headfirst into the chaos and drama that led to its downfall. Spoiler alert, it's got all the makings of a blockbuster: internal strife, external pressures, and a final act that pits Lydia against none other than Cyrus the Great. Buckle up, because this is not your average bedtime story. Let's rewind to the mid-6th century BCE, a period when Lydia was strutting its stuff like the rock star of the ancient world. But behind that glitzy facade, trouble was brewing. Internally, Lydia was like a celebrity on the brink of public meltdown. Croesus, with his Midas-like touch, was spreading wealth like confetti, but even gold can't plaster over cracks forever. The Lydian elite, accustomed to the good life, found themselves at odds over how to handle this newfound prosperity. Imagine a board meeting where everyone shows up in gold-plated chariots but can't agree on the menu for lunch. Yeah, it was that kind of chaos. Externally, the spotlight was turning into a glaring searchlight, attracting the attention of the Persian Empire. Enter Cyrus the Great, a ruler with a penchant for empire building and the charisma of a world leader on a mission. By 547 BCE, Cyrus had already secured his legacy by gobbling up territories faster than you could say conquest. His eyes now set on Lydia, Cyrus was more than ready to take on the kingdom's wealth and strategic location. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, with the Battle of Thymbra in 547 BCE as the main act. Picture this: Croesus, confident as ever, had gathered his forces, ready to defend his golden kingdom. But Cyrus, always the tactical genius, wasn't just bringing brute force to the party. No, he brought camels. Yes, camels, to throw Croesus's cavalry into disarray. You see, horses are notoriously skittish around camels, and Cyrus used this to his advantage, turning what could have been a straightforward battle into a strategic masterstroke. The Lydians, despite their wealth and bravado, were no match for Cyrus's cunning. The Persians breached the walls of Sardis, Lydia's capital, like an ancient SWAT team on a mission. In a matter of weeks, Lydia went from a kingdom of glittering opulence to a vassal state under Persian control. It was like watching a high-stakes poker game where the house suddenly changes the rules, and Croesus finds himself out of chips and out of luck. Now, let's take a moment to dissect the myths versus the realities of this conquest. We've all heard the tale of Croesus consulting the oracle of Delphi, only to misinterpret the prophecy and seal his fate. It's the stuff of legend, a tragic hero undone by his own hubris. But the truth is less poetic and more pragmatic. The oracle's ambiguous words were likely a shrewd political maneuver, designed to keep Croesus guessing and the Greeks out of Persian crosshairs. In the end, it wasn't divine will, but clever diplomacy and superior strategy that tipped the scales. The story doesn't end with Lydia's absorption into the Persian Empire. The narrative handed down by the victors often paints the Lydians as passive victims of history, swept away by the tides of Persian expansion. But let's not forget, history is written by the winners, and their version can be as much about spin as it is about fact. The Lydians were not mere spectators. They were active players in a geopolitical game that was as ruthless as it was complex. In the aftermath of the conquest, the Lydians found themselves integrated into the Persian administrative apparatus. They became part of the satrapy system, contributing to the vast machinery of one of history's greatest empires. It's a testament to Lydia's adaptability that even in defeat, it managed to maintain a semblance of its cultural and economic identity. They didn't just roll over. They leveraged their expertise in trade and coinage to remain relevant, even under Persian rule. And here's a little nugget to chew on. Even as a satrapy, Lydia's coins continued to circulate widely, a testament to their enduring influence. The Lydian model of coinage spread through the Persian Empire like wildfire, reshaping economies far and wide. It's a reminder that even in the shadow of defeat, Lydia's contributions to the world economy were indelible. As we wrap up this chapter, remember this: Lydia's fall was not just the end of a kingdom, but the beginning of a new chapter in the ancient world, set the stage for the rise of the Persian Empire and the eventual clash of civilizations that would define the classical era. The echoes of Lydia's legacy are still heard today, in the coins jingling in our pockets and the stories we tell of ambition, hubris, and the eternal dance of power. Stay tuned, because the story isn't over. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths waiting to be revealed. So, as we pull back the velvet curtain on Lydia's storied past, let's spotlight the enduring legacy of this ancient powerhouse. Lydia's story isn't just about gold coins and military conquests. It's a mosaic of economic ingenuity and cultural vibrancy that echoes through the ages. The kingdom's pioneering role in the minting of coins is like the ancient world's version of the internet. It completely rewired how trade and commerce operated. Imagine a world where every transaction was a game of, let's guess the goat's worth. Lydia came along and flipped the script with coins made of electrum, standardizing trade and making life a whole lot easier for merchants and traders. This isn't just ancient history trivia, it's the dawn of modern economics. Let's dive into some numbers. Around 600 BCE, when Lydia introduced the first coins, each piece of electrum was stamped with insignia that guaranteed its value. It was like an ancient quality control sticker. These coins weighed between 4, 7 and 17, 2 grams, making them portable enough for trade but substantial enough to signify real value. With this innovation, Lydia didn't just boost its own economy, it set a precedent that rippled across the ancient world. The Greeks, always quick on the uptake, adopted coinage faster than a philosopher at a symposium, and soon coins became the lingua franca of trade throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. Now, the cultural contributions of Lydia are perhaps less tangible than a shiny coin, but no less impactful. Think of Lydia as the ancient world's cool older sibling, the one who introduces you to new music and art. We owe a nod to the Lydians for their influence on Greek music. Remember the aulos, that woodwind instrument that Herodotus claimed Lydia gifted to Greece. It was like handing over a guitar to a budding rock star. The Greeks took this instrument and ran with it, integrating it into their own compositions and performances. But music wasn't the only area where Lydia left its mark. Let's talk textiles. Lydia was renowned for its luxurious fabrics, particularly a type of wool known as Sardian wool, named after Sardes, the Lydian capital. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill sheep's coat. It was soft, dyed with the rich colors that were the envy of many a neighboring kingdom. Lydia's reputation for high-quality textiles was like having the haute couture of the ancient world. And just like a modern luxury brand, Lydia's textiles were sought after across the region, adding another notch to its economic belt. Of course, Lydia's story isn't just a celebratory tale of innovation and influence. It's also a cautionary narrative about the fickle nature of wealth and power. The kingdom's rise and fall serve as a stark reminder that prosperity, while dazzling, is transient. Croesus, for all his wealth and wisdom, learned this the hard way. His tale is a classic example of how overconfidence and misinterpretation can lead to downfall. But let's not oversimplify this into a neat moral lesson. History is messy, full of shades of grey, and Lydia's legacy is no exception. The political and social dynamics at play during Lydia's height were as complex as a modern-day thriller. The kingdom's strategic alliances, particularly with the Greeks, were a testament to its diplomatic acumen. Lydia wasn't just a passive player, it was actively shaping the geopolitical landscape. These alliances were like having a VIP pass to the ancient world's most exclusive club, ensuring that Lydia was always part of the conversation. And here's where we bust another myth. The idea that Lydia was simply swallowed by the Persian Empire, never to be heard from again. In truth, Lydia's legacy persisted long after its political autonomy was lost. As a satrapy under Persian rule, Lydia continued to thrive economically and culturally. It wasn't just subsumed, it adapted and integrated, influencing the Persian administrative system and contributing to the empire's vast network of trade. Fast forward a few centuries, and Lydia's influence is still felt. The concept of coinage, born in the fertile valleys of Lydia, evolved and spread, eventually becoming the foundation of our modern financial systems. The cultural exchanges that Lydia facilitated between East and West laid the groundwork for the rich tapestry of ideas that would flourish in the classical world. Lydia's story reminds us that while empires rise and fall, the innovations and ideas they birth can endure, shaping the future in ways the original creators could never have imagined. So as we wrap up this journey through Lydia's history, what can we take away? Perhaps it's the realization that history is not a simple tale of winners and losers. It's a complex web of human endeavor, where innovation and ambition collide with the harsh realities of power dynamics. Lydia's legacy is a testament to the enduring impact of cultural and economic innovation. It's a reminder that even the most glittering empires can crumble, but their contributions to the human story can echo through the ages. In the end, the tale of Lydia is more than just a footnote in the annals of history. It's a vibrant chapter that speaks to the timeless dance of power, wealth, and cultural exchange. And just like a well-struck Lydian coin, its legacy continues to shine brightly, a beacon for those who dare to dream big and innovate even in the face of uncertainty. So here's to Lydia, a kingdom that, despite its fall, taught the world how to gild its ambitions with both gold and wisdom. You open your eyes to the faint light filtering through the narrow windows of your stone keep, a Norman knight in 11th century England, ready to tackle another day of feudal fun. Forget the Hollywood glamour of knights in shining armor. Your life is more about keeping your head above the muddy waters of medieval economics and less about rescuing damsels in distress. You're part of a system that's as rigid as your chainmail, where every morning starts with the same thoughts: horses, armor, and the relentless demands of your lord. The feudal system, where you think you're a big shot, but really you're just another cog in the machine. As you rise, the first thing you consider is your armor. That shiny panoply isn't just for show. It's your passport to battle, your shield against death, and more mundanely, your ticket to financial insecurity. A suit of armor can cost you up to 40 shillings. In today's terms, that's the equivalent of a small fortune, or just about every coin you could scrape together from the rent of your lands. Lands given to you by your liege in exchange for military service. Yes, it's a bit like getting a company car, except this one requires constant maintenance and could save your life. And then there are the horses. You're not just riding for pleasure or an Instagram-worthy jaunt through the countryside. Your warhorse is a beast of burden in more ways than one, eating its weight in oats, hay, and your hard-earned cash. Keeping a destrier in fighting shape could set you back another 20 to 30 shillings a year, assuming it doesn't fall ill or suffer an untimely demise in battle. Suddenly, that romantic image of galloping into the sunset seems a little less dreamy when you consider the bills you're racking up. The social structure doesn't cut you much slack either. As a knight, you're caught in a web of obligations that define every relationship you have. Your allegiance to your lord isn't just a handshake agreement. It's a binding contract sealed with lands you manage in his name. These lands are your lifeline, your source of income, and your responsibility. But remember, they're not really yours. You're holding them in trust, and your lord can take them back as easily as he gave them. Talk about job insecurity. Your duties aren't just about brandishing swords and jousting in tournaments. There's an expectation of military service whenever your lord demands it, which means being ready to pack up and go to war at a moment's notice. And those pesky taxes. Don't think you're exempt just because you wield a sword. The king and your lord both have their hands in your pockets, expecting their cut of whatever meager profits your lands yield. The feudal system might grant you status, but it's a status that keeps you perpetually on edge, juggling your obligations like a medieval multitasker. As you shrug on your chainmail, you ponder the romantic myths about chivalrous knights and noble quests. Sure, the stories are intoxicating, tales of honor and valor that make you feel larger than life. But the reality is more about balancing the books and meeting feudal obligations. Chivalry may be the code you live by, but it's not exactly a cure for financial headaches or a shield against political intrigues. It's a nice ideal, but you know better than to let it cloud your judgment when your feet are firmly planted in the muck of medieval life. Your day as a Norman knight is more than just donning armor and mounting your steed. It's a dance of survival, a game of chess where every move counts. Your loyalty is your currency, and your skills in warfare are your stock in trade. You're a part of a greater tapestry, woven tightly into the social and economic fabric of the time. And while the allure of knighthood might sparkle in the stories, your reality is grounded in the cold, hard facts of keeping your head above water in a system designed to keep you on your toes. So, as you prepare to step out into the world, you've got a full plate. From managing your estate to ensuring your armor is battle-ready, every action is a calculation, a careful consideration of the costs and benefits. Because in the end, being a knight isn't just about the glory. It's about navigating the complexities of a world where every advantage comes with a price tag, and every allegiance is a double-edged sword. Welcome to 11th century England, where the legend meets the ledger in the life of a Norman knight. As you strap on your sword and prepare to face the day, you're reminded that being a knight isn't just about swinging blades and charging into battle. Today, you're heading to the local court session, a place where the political machinery of Norman England grinds away, often as loudly and gracelessly as a blacksmith's hammer. Welcome to the medieval courtroom, where justice isn't blind, it's just cross-eyed and wearing chainmail. Now, let's get one thing straight. The Norman legal system wasn't exactly the paragon of fairness we might romanticize today. It was more like a medieval version of Judge Judy, with a lot more mud and a lot less decorum. The Normans had a bit of a reputation for reorganizing everything they touched, and the legal system was no exception. They introduced the jury system, which was a big deal. But before you start picturing a dozen of your peers solemnly deliberating in a wood-paneled room, let's paint a more accurate picture. The jury wasn't so much a gathering of impartial citizens as it was a collection of local lords and landholders, people who, like you, had skin in the game. They were there to swear the truth rather than weigh evidence with the cool detachment of modern-day juries. In a time when literacy was as rare as a unicorn, relying on a man's sworn word was the closest you got to a legal document. So, yes, the jury system was a step forward, but let's not kid ourselves. It was a stumble rather than a leap. And then there's the myth of chivalry. Chivalry, the code of conduct that supposedly turned you and your knightly peers into paragons of virtue. But in reality, chivalry was as much about enforcing your lord's will as it was about saving damsels from dragons. Think of knights as the medieval version of bouncers, keeping the peace with a firm hand and making sure everyone paid their dues. You weren't just a warrior, you were an enforcer of the feudal order, making sure the peasants knew their place and the taxes flowed like ale at a feast. The court session kicks off with the usual flair: land disputes, accusations of theft, maybe a bit of witchcraft thrown in for good measure. In a world where personal reputation was worth more than gold, these sessions could get as heated as a July afternoon. Justice was swift and often severe. Forget lengthy appeals or nuanced arguments. A case might be settled by a duel or an ordeal, where divine intervention was expected to reveal the truth. It's a bit like flipping a coin, assuming the coin is on fire and you're the one holding it. Economically, these court sessions were crucial. They upheld the rights of property owners, you included, because at the end of the day, everything boiled down to land and the wealth it generated. Your status as a knight was tied to land, and land was the currency of power. Lose your land, and you might as well hang up your helmet. The political environment of the time was as cutthroat as any battlefield, and understanding the legal landscape was essential to keeping your piece of the pie. But let's not forget the theater of it all. As much as these sessions were about justice, they were also about showing strength. A knight like you had to project authority, demonstrating not just your prowess with a sword, but your ability to command respect and maintain order. This wasn't just about settling scores. It was about reinforcing the social hierarchy that kept you in armor and oaths. Every verdict, every decree, was a reminder of the feudal chain that bound everyone together, from the lowliest serf to the king himself. The myth of the gallant, noble knight is seductive, but peel back the layers, and you find a world where survival often trumped honor. Sure, there were moments of bravery and selflessness. No one's denying that. But for every tale of heroism, there were countless acts of pragmatism and ruthlessness. Being a knight wasn't just about riding into the sunset. It was about ensuring you had a horse to ride and a sunset to ride into. As the court session winds down, with justice served and scores settled for now, you reflect on the day's proceedings. It's a reminder that while the legends of knighthood may shine brightly, the reality is more about mud-stained boots and blood-stained swords. You're part of a complex tapestry, one where each thread supports the next, and you play your part with all the cunning and courage you can muster. The world of a Norman knight is a balancing act, where the scales of justice are often tipped by the weight of a sword. And as you leave the court, you know that tomorrow will bring more challenges, more battles, both on the field and in the halls of power. But for now, you're content to be a cog in the grand machine of Norman England, because without you, the whole thing might just grind to a halt. As you leave the court, pondering the day's events, your stomach reminds you that even knights need sustenance. The romantic notion of a medieval feast with overflowing turkey legs and goblets of wine is as misleading as a minstrel's ballad. In reality, lunch for a Norman knight is far more modest. Think bread, cheese, and ale. Not exactly the stuff of legends, but it keeps you going through the demands of feudal responsibility. Let's start with the bread, the cornerstone of any medieval meal. Your daily loaf is likely made from rye or barley, the earthy taste a constant reminder of the agricultural backbone that supports your status. Wheat is a luxury for the elite, and while you might get your hands on some during a good harvest, it's not an everyday affair. This isn't your modern artisanal sourdough. It's denser, more akin to a brick, and serves as much as a plate as it does a staple food. Bread is life, or at least your best shot at staving off midday hunger. Cheese enters the scene as both a source of fat and protein, crucial for maintaining your knightly physique. Forget the fancy wheels aged to perfection. Your cheese is likely brined or smoked, a practical method to ensure it lasts without refrigeration. The cheese of the era is more about sustenance than subtlety, a straightforward solution to the dietary needs of someone who might have to leap into battle at the drop of a helm. Now, about that ale. It's not just a beverage, it's essentially liquid bread. With water purity being more myth than reality, ale is safer to drink and provides a few calories to boot. Brewed locally, the ale is part of a self-sustaining economic system that relies on every manor having its own brewery. It's a social lubricant too, greasing the wheels of feudal interaction and smoothing over the rough edges of a system that keeps you constantly on your toes, or more often on your horse. But where does all this food come from? Enter the complex logistics of medieval food production and distribution. Your manor lands are cultivated by the peasants, the backbone of the agricultural machine. It's a give-and-take system where they work the fields in exchange for protection and a share of the harvest. These peasants are the unsung heroes of your daily bread, quite literally. They toil in the fields, making sure that the granaries are filled and that you, their armored overlord, have enough on your plate to keep you from turning into a hangry tyrant. Trade routes also play a vital role in broadening your diet. Although the roads are more like dirt tracks and bandits are a constant threat, goods still find their way to and from local markets, thanks to the intrepid merchants who brave the elements and the lawless expanses between towns. Spice from the east, salt from coastal mines, and wine from the vineyards of France trickle into the manor, each a small reminder of the wider world beyond your castle walls. These items aren't just luxuries, they're status symbols, marking you as someone who's connected, someone who matters. Speaking of castles, let's not romanticize the place you call home. Sure, it's a symbol of power and prestige, but it's also a drafty, stone-cold fortress. Forget luxurious tapestries and roaring fires in every room. Your castle is more about function than form, designed to withstand sieges and project strength rather than provide comfort. The Great Hall, where you dine, doubles as a courtroom, a place for strategy meetings and the occasional feast. It's a multi-purpose space, much like a medieval Swiss army knife of social and political functions. Your role as a knight extends beyond the battlefield and the courtroom. You're also part of the local governance. It's a bit like being the mayor, sheriff, and head of the neighborhood watch all rolled into one. You're responsible for ensuring justice is served, within the parameters set by your lord, of course, and for maintaining the peace. This means quelling disputes, collecting taxes, and occasionally dealing with the odd rebellion or two. The weight of governance is as heavy as your chainmail, but it's a critical part of the social order that keeps you in your privileged position. And let's not forget the defense of your realm. The threat of invasion is ever present, whether from rival lords, disgruntled vassals, or the ubiquitous Viking raiders. Your castle isn't just a home, it's a bastion, a last line of defense against those who would see you and your holdings in ruin. You're constantly preparing, training, and strategizing, because in a world where power is often measured by military might, being caught off guard can mean the difference between victory and defeat. Castle life is a daily grind of duty and diligence, a far cry from the romanticized image of gallant knights and fair maidens. It's a constant juggling act, balancing the needs of the people with the whims of those above you in the feudal hierarchy. You're a mediator, a manager, and a military leader, with every decision echoing through the halls of power and affecting the lives of those around you. Your reality is far richer and more complex than the tales of yore would have you believe, a tapestry of responsibility and resilience woven into the very fabric of Norman England. As you finish your humble meal, you're reminded of the intricate web of relationships and responsibilities that define your life. The food on your plate, the castle walls around you, and the people under your protection are all interconnected, each thread relying on the others to maintain the delicate balance of power and prosperity. It's a system that demands your constant attention and engagement, a never-ending series of challenges that test your mettle as a knight and a leader. And so, as you prepare to tackle the next set of tasks, you carry with you the knowledge that being a knight is about more than just armor and swords. It's about navigating the complexities of a world where every decision, every action, contributes to the greater whole. You're part of a living history, a participant in the grand narrative of a time that's as brutal as it is fascinating, as full of adventure as it is of adversity. The story continues, and you're ready to write the next chapter with all the wit and wisdom you can muster. As you push your plate aside, you realize it's time to trade the comforts of the castle for the clamor of the training yard. The afternoon sun hangs heavy in the sky, casting long shadows as you prepare to hone your combat skills. Forget the Hollywood version, where knights casually swing swords with the grace of ballet dancers. In reality, it's more like a medieval gym session, complete with sweat, grunts, and the occasional colorful curse word echoing off the stone walls. Welcome to the world of medieval warfare, where the sword isn't just a shiny prop, but a crucial tool of your trade. Let's start with the basics, the knightly sword. This isn't some lightweight foil. It's a hefty piece of iron, typically about 30 to 40 inches long and weighing around 5 to 3 pounds. Sure, that doesn't sound like much until you're swinging it repeatedly while wearing 50 pounds of armor. The sword is your go-to weapon, versatile and reliable, whether you're hacking through enemy lines or defending your lord's honor in a duel. But wait, there's more in your arsenal. Enter the lance, the medieval equivalent of a guided missile. At up to 12 feet long, this wooden shaft with a pointed metal tip is perfect for charging into battle on horseback. It's designed to break on impact, which might sound wasteful until you consider the alternative, getting unhorsed by your own weapon. And let's not forget the crossbow, a game-changer on the battlefield. With a range of up to 300 meters, it's like having a sniper rifle in an era where most combat was face-to-face. The crossbow doesn't require the same level of skill as a longbow, making it the perfect choice for leveling the playing field, or rather, the battlefield. Now, about that armor. The chainmail you're wearing might be effective against swords and arrows, but it's not invincible. A well-placed lance, or a heavy mace, can still do some serious damage. That's why you're constantly practicing, honing your reflexes and strategies to survive the chaos of medieval combat. The training yard is where you test your mettle, both literally and figuratively. It's a place of bruises and blisters, of learning the hard way that chivalry won't protect you from a well-aimed blow. The myth of honor in battle is a seductive one, but let's not get carried away. Sure, there are tales of knights sparing worthy opponents and engaging in gentlemanly combat, but the reality is bloodier and far less poetic. Warfare in the 11th century is brutal, a messy affair where victory often comes down to who's left standing. There's no code of conduct when your life is on the line, and the so-called rules of chivalry are often as flexible as the swords you wield. It's not about fighting fair, it's about fighting to win. And what about the psychological toll of being a perpetual warrior? Every day, you're reminded of the constant threat of rebellion and invasion, the possibility that tomorrow you might be called to defend your lord's lands or reclaim your own. It's a stress that wears on you, even in the quiet moments. The adrenaline of battle is addictive, but it leaves scars, both visible and invisible. You're always on edge, always ready to fight, because in this world, complacency can be fatal. As you spar with your fellow knights, you can't help but notice the camaraderie that forms in the crucible of combat. These are the men you'll stand beside on the battlefield, the ones who will watch your back as you charge into the fray. It's a bond forged in sweat and steel, one that transcends the social hierarchy that governs your everyday life. Here, in the training yard, you're not just a knight, you're part of a brotherhood, bound by the shared experience of life and death. Yet, even as you practice your combat skills, there's a part of you that longs for something more than the endless cycle of battle and duty. The romantic ideal of knighthood is alluring, but the reality is a grind, a relentless march toward the next conflict, the next challenge. You wonder if there's room for something beyond the sword, for a life that isn't defined by the armor you wear or the battles you fight. But for now, you push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the rhythm of your sword as it clashes against your opponent's shield. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting the training yard in a warm glow, you wrap up your session. Your muscles ache, your body is weary, but there's a sense of satisfaction in knowing you've honed your skills, that you're ready for whatever tomorrow brings. You're a knight, after all, and in this world, that means being ever prepared, ever vigilant. The legends of knighthood might paint a picture of glory and honor, but the truth is far more complex. It's a life of constant preparation, of balancing the demands of duty with the harsh realities of survival. As you head back to your castle, you carry the weight of your armor and the knowledge that your place in this world is as much about cunning and resilience as it is about bravery and strength. And while the stories of gallant knights may endure, you know that the true tale is one of grit and determination, of navigating the challenges of a world where the line between hero and survivor is often blurred. Tomorrow will bring its own set of challenges, its own tests of skill and character. But for now, as you walk the familiar path back to the castle, you're content in the knowledge that you're part of a grand tradition, a legacy of courage and complexity that stretches far beyond the walls of your keep. The afternoon's practice has ended, but the story of your life as a Norman knight continues, as rich and layered as the history you helped to shape. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the stone walls of your castle, you find a moment's respite to reflect on the day and the world you inhabit. The evening air carries a chill, a reminder that, in 11th century England, comfort is as elusive as a fairy-tale dragon. But let's set aside the sword and chainmail for a moment and talk about the Norman legacy. Because, believe it or not, it's about more than just battles and feudal shenanigans. When the Normans weren't busy rearranging the map of Europe, they were leaving an indelible mark on the cultural landscape. Take architecture, for example. If you've ever marveled at a Romanesque church with its thick walls and rounded arches, you've got the Normans to thank. These stone behemoths weren't just about aesthetics. They were a bold statement of power and faith. The great cathedrals like Durham, begun in 1093, are as much about divine devotion as they are about Norman dominance. They were the skyscrapers of their day, towering over the landscape, casting long shadows that whispered of both heaven and earthly authority. And let's talk about language. The Norman Conquest didn't just shake up the social hierarchy, it gave the English language a thorough makeover. Before 1066, Old English was the lingua franca, think Beowulf, and a lot of words that sound more like throat-clearing exercises. But after the Normans barged in, French became the language of the court, law, and aristocracy. This linguistic cocktail party resulted in Middle English, a blend of Anglo-Saxon grit and Norman sophistication. It's why English today has fancy words like beef from the French boeuf, instead of just cow for dinner. It's a linguistic legacy that's as enduring as it is eclectic, shaping the words you use every day, even if you don't realize it. Now, let's zoom out and consider the bigger picture. The Normans were more than just conquerors. They were cultural magpies, picking up shiny bits of art, architecture, and governance from wherever they went. Their rule brought a new administrative order, with the Domesday Book of 1086 serving as the medieval census of who owned what and who owed what. It was like the IRS of its day, ensuring that no cow or acre went unaccounted for. This meticulous record-keeping laid the groundwork for modern bureaucracy and tax systems, a legacy that probably doesn't get a lot of love come tax season, but there it is. But what about the knights themselves, those armored icons of medieval romance and reality? Here's where the legend both dazzles and deceives. The allure of the gallant knight, rescuing damsels and slaying dragons, is a narrative as appealing as it is misleading. Yes, there were moments of valor and bravery, but there were also moments of political maneuvering and opportunism. Knights were as much politicians as they were warriors, wielding influence in the courts as deftly as they wielded swords on the battlefield. It's a duality that underscores the complexity of their role, a balancing act between honor and ambition. And history. Oh, history loves its legends. The troubadours and bards spun tales of knights that were as much propaganda as they were entertainment, crafting stories that burnished reputations and cemented legacies. But behind the shimmering facade of chivalry lies a more pragmatic truth. Being a knight was often about survival, navigating a world of shifting allegiances and ever-present threats. It's a reminder that the past is populated by real people, whose lives were as messy and complicated as our own. In the end, the Norman knights left a legacy that's as layered as the armor they wore. They were builders of empire and culture, architects of a society that straddled the line between chaos and order. Their story is one of innovation and adaptation, of myth and reality, intertwined in a way that continues to capture our imagination. So, as you stand on the battlements, gazing out into the gathering dusk, you carry with you the weight of that legacy, a testament to an era that shaped the world in ways both grand and subtle. As evening deepens, you retreat to the warmth of the great hall, where the fire crackles and the shadows dance. It's a scene that evokes the stories of old, where knights gathered to recount their deeds and chart their futures. The flickering light casts long shadows, a fitting metaphor for the enduring influence of the Normans. Their impact is seen in the architecture that still stands, the language that still evolves, and the systems of governance that persist. It's a legacy that stretches across centuries, woven into the very fabric of modern life. And so, as the day draws to a close, you reflect on the dual nature of knighthood and the era it represents. It's a time of contradictions, of legends and truths, where every tale holds a kernel of reality, and every reality is touched by myth. The Norman knights were more than just figures of history. They were shapers of it, leaving behind a world transformed by their presence. It's a legacy that endures, a story that continues to unfold, as complex and captivating as the knights themselves. So there you have it, an evening in the life of a Norman knight, framed by the grandeur and grit of 11th century England. It's a tale of power and perseverance, of a world where the line between legend and reality is as blurred as the horizon at dusk. And as you settle into the rhythm of the night, you know that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new stories to tell. But for now, you rest, knowing that you're part of a history that's as rich and resonant as the echoes of time itself.